calling our public hearing to order for May 7th, 2026 at 1:32 p.m.
Must be.
Commissioners Bateson, Foster, Harwood, James, Slater, Summer, and Bowles are present. Community Development staff in attendance is Community Development Director Mike Bahari, Planning Manager Ben Tarbutton, Administrative Secretary Jocelyn Henning, and Administrative Manager Rita Britness. Also in attendance is Kootenai County Civil Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Pat Braden. And I will ask for if there's any changes to the agenda. Okay, no changes to the agenda were requested. We'll accept the agenda as written. And next are the approval of the April 16, 2026 minutes. Are there any changes to the April 16, 2026 minutes? Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve said minutes.
So motion?
Just so, because we don't have our little microphones, when we talk, if we could speak up so they can hear it in the back of the room as well.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, next for our public hearing, just pull for conflict of interest. Does anybody have a conflict of interest for the items that we discussed today? Okay. No conflicts were identified, so we're gonna go straight into our public hearing. I will outline the public hearing process that we will be using today. I will open the public hearing covering case number ORA 26-0001, ordinance number 640, and case number ORA 26-0002, ordinance number 641. Community Development Director Mike Bahari and Planning Manager Ben Tarbutton will provide an overview of the ordinances and answer any questions from the planning commissioners. After that, we will open it to the public for public comments for both ordinances. Once all comments have been heard, I will close the public hearing, and the planning and zoning commissioners will enter into separate deliberations and make separate decisions on each ordinance. We again will be discussing ORA 26-0001, which covers ordinance number 640, which is expired building permit ordinances, establishing a 10-year sliding scale standard for enforcement of expired building permits. And case number ORA 26-0002, ordinance number 641, providing for protection measures regarding mining activities on parcels located entirely or partially over the Raptor Prairie Aquifer. Workshops covering these topics have been held with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I will now open up the public hearing and give it to our Development Director and Planning Manager.
Thank you, Commissioners. Good afternoon. As Commissioner Bateson said, today we have before you two ordinances for public hearing. The first being ORA 26-0001 for the expired building permits. This is a requested change to Title 7, which is the building ordinance, and in which case we have had permits that extend over periods of time. They become difficult for staff to track, and generally when they've exceeded a certain amount of time of inactivity, they become expired, and then the staff then looks at them as being a code violation and then tracks them through the code violation process. What this ordinance is meant to do is once a permit has essentially exceeded the 10-year period from the date it was issued, that as long as it is still in line with what was originally approved, that we would no longer pursue it as a violation. So that's essentially, this 10-year period would be a sliding scale with the present date. So I think over that period of time, it's kind of stood the test of time. And the staff believes that it's no longer necessary to pursue for violation purposes. I do have the building official, Chris Garland, here, so she is available. Should you have any questions from the building division? But essentially, again, as we've already mentioned, this did come before the planning commission in the form of a workshop. If there are any questions of the planning commission, we'd be happy to answer them for the time being. So moving on to then, the next ordinance, is ORA 260002. Pull this one up real quick here. Community development staff has been working in coordination with the Aquifer Protection District in looking at surface mining specifically over the Rafton Prairie Aquifer, and the vulnerability, I guess, that mining activity creates over the Rafton Prairie Aquifer. There are instances, and we do have members of the Aquifer Protection District here today that are planning on making a presentation, but there are instances looking across the border in Washington, in which case we have mining activity that has resulted in the aquifer to have surfaced. Again, that creates a vulnerability of contamination to the water source for the surrounding citizens. As a result, there is a proposal here before you, looking at these areas, creating some standards for these pits, and to create, at a minimum, a protection buffer of 50 feet from the known highest point of the aquifer boundary of that pit site, that particular pit site, and to the lowest depth of their excavated pit floor. That would be a 50-foot buffer. Among others, as again mentioned here before you, I think that is kind of what staff wanted to mention at the moment, and then we would like to defer our time for introduction to the Aquifer Protection District for presentation. If that's appropriate for you, we can go ahead and cue that up.
Did you have a question, Tim?
Yeah, have we come up with where the 50 feet came from yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe the Aquifer Protection District is prepared to address that point.
Okay.
So we're all good, just letting you go? Further?
Okay, go ahead and start that here.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Shane, and I'm here today representing the Aquifer Protection District. I appreciate having the chance to present this information. So, to begin, can everyone see this, or am I in the way?
Speak up to that.
Yes, sure. How is that? Better? Okay. So I wanted to start off with just talking about the formation of the Aquifer Protection District. And it was approved by voter consensus of Kootenai County residences to establish an Aquifer Protection District for the purpose of establishing protections of the aquifer as it benefits the state economy, maintains a water supply that does not require extensive treatment prior to human consumption or commercial use, and avoids the economic costs of remedial action. And you could move to the next slide. That's okay. So, in 2024, the Aquifer Protection District advisory members created a master plan to outline our priorities as we move forward over the next 10 years. And one of those priorities was identifying regulatory gaps that would leave the aquifer vulnerable or susceptible to contamination. And we have identified a regulatory gap that could leave the aquifer susceptible to contamination from surface mining activities. So I just wanted to talk about how we got here. And I can start off by introducing Jeremy Jenkins. You can see him in the middle, there he is. But Jeremy Jenkins is president of the Spokane Aquifer Joint Board. SAJB is comprised of 21 municipal water supplies in Spokane County. And he came to an APD meeting in June of 2023 to talk to us about the concerns SAJB has with 4 quarries in Spokane County that have excavated down to the aquifer depth that are within the intersecting well capture zones of municipal wells in Spokane County. We can keep going. So I think the last time I met with you, there was some question about, well, that's a very big word, but what is an intersecting well capture zone? So I wanted to bring this map to you. This is produced, it's a map that's produced by a hydrogeologic model called ModFlow USG. And it is created by the United States Geological Survey. And what you're looking at here is well capture zones for the Moab wells in Spokane County. So there are 4 municipal wells in Spokane County, and then this is the county boundary between Spokane and Kootenai. This is the groundwater that is flowing into that well. That is the groundwater path. And that area is a 1-year travel time. So that light green area would depict 1 year for the groundwater to flow, 1 year or less for the groundwater to flow to that well. The medium green area is 5 years or less for that groundwater to flow to that well. And the dark green is 10 years of travel time for the, so essentially, any impacts would be considered in this area would be considered to be part of the capture zone for that well. Does that make sense? You may have heard about APD talking about SARAs, the sensitive aquifer recharge areas, and I brought this map to show you that as well. This is Hauser Lake, and then this would be the sensitive aquifer recharge area. So we would see a 15-year or a 10-year time of travel here, and a 5-year time of travel here from the SARA to that Moab well in Spokane County. Yes?
That's just a quick question.
Sure.
When you say travel time, you mean if I put a little duck in that water, it would take that 5 years to get
That's
to the water.
exactly what I mean.
But if I put arsenic in the water, are you saying it takes 5 years for arsenic to get to the well, or does it permeate faster as well?
It would take 5 years would be the concern. And Seth Oliver is here. Seth, you have the better, Seth is a professional hydrogeologist from DEP.
Yeah, arsenic specifically, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but arsenic specifically, there can be chemistries that might have it here, but,
Forget the arsenic. I mean,
But
because
yeah.
different substances, it seems to me, are gonna travel at different rates or infiltrate at different rates within water. I'm no expert.
yeah,
Something like that.
for all intents and purposes, yeah, it's basically you put a duck in the water and it's going to flow with that. Again, there is like small variances depending on the chemical, but by and large, that's a good average ballpark. And again, for this time of travel, it's more well specific. So the time of travel, the groundwater velocity in the Raffin Prairie is 60 feet per day. So if you put above the duck and it floats, it moves 60 feet every day. But for wells, this is specifically, because it might just go by the Moab well, right? If you put a duck in, it's not going to be in a specific flow path toward that well. That might just go by it, but the well has some amount of influence the same way a drain does. So bigger wells have a bigger drain, right? If it's a 3,000 gallon per minute well, it's going to have a bigger capture zone. If it's a 5 gallon per minute well, not many flow lines are going to go to it because it's a small sink, right? It's not like, it's not a big piece of, it's not a big post well.
Does that answer your question?
On that,
Yes.
so with the increase of people coming in, wells, et cetera, does that influence it at all?
I'd say to answer that question the way you worded it, again, a bigger well will cause a well to have a bigger capture zone. So, for instance, Post Falls and City Coeur have large wells. They have 11 and 10 wells each, respectively. And I don't know, say Beck Road well or well number 6 in Post Falls, they move like 2,000 or 3,000 GPM, which is pretty big for a well. It's a massive capture zone, and so if they have to put, twice as many people on that well or drill more wells, it's sort of, again, there's just more spots that can capture that water. So I would say that it's a water use question, and it's gonna vary by how, if they drill more wells or if they just increase how much the well operates.
So the more water we're using over time, the more people we put out there, the more water we're using is going to increase that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Let's go through the podium speak.
Yeah.
State your name.
My name is Seth Oliver, the camera, my name is Seth Oliver, I'm the hydrogeologist for the Kootenai region, Idaho DEQ. Yeah, so just rephrase the question so I can answer it. So number one,
Well, the more wells we're drilling on the prairie and the different towns and stuff, so there's more water being used and we're flushing more water and everything, so the more water we're using, is that going to increase the amount of time or lessen the amount of time it's going to take for the water to go?
yeah, I would say, yeah, specifically, the question isn't really, it's not as directly pertinent for this specific figure here, but, if you put wells, stack wells on top of each other, the sum of those capture zones, it gets really complicated. The geometry of a cone of depression, basically a well has an upside down cone beneath it when you pump it, and then if you have another well next to it, those cones will intersect, and they'll kind of be, the sum will be greater than the part, right? So it'll have a larger influence, and so maybe it'll act as a larger drain, perhaps.
Was the point that affects the flow, it increases the flow when you have, when you can take out the water, it increases, kind of a low pressure system in the water?
Right, yeah, so when you draw down a well, it artificially creates a low pressure zone, which makes water want to flow toward that low spot, right? Water flows from high to low, so the more you pump, the lower that table goes, and so the more things want to flow to that low spot artificially. Whereas if you weren't pumping, it might just go right by that point. So it's sort of like, you know, a black hole, so to speak, gravitational force, something like that.
The reason I was asking questions about flow is later on, it's gonna relate to the concern of contamination, how fast, you know, contamination
Travels, yeah.
occurs.
Yeah, and that, I would say asking really specific detailed questions would be good. Again, I'll try to expound like from a general sense, but, when you get to a site-specific questions, it gets really in the weeds on what numbers should be used, and things like that, so I'll try to be as useful for like a planning and zoning perspective, but, yeah.
So, thank you very much. All right, then. So you may recall that Jeremy mentioned 4 quarry sites, and this was the first one. This is a site that is off the Northeast Sutherland I-90 area. Just as reference, you can, I-90 is right here, and then you've got the Spokane River. But this site is within 12 municipal well capture zones in Spokane County. Jeremy also talked about the second site, which is referred to locally as the Lawrence D. Stone Lake, but it is not a lake. This is the aquifer. There's been a boat dock that's been constructed here, and there's also been reports of fish being, fish docking in this one. Yes?
You know, I'm a water purveyor, I manage public drinking water system, and I just do other things I do. And, you know, the source of drinking water around here is groundwater, which is classified as groundwater. Groundwater influenced by surface situation. And of course, surface water, like we pumped out of a lake or a creek, and the testing and management requirements between just regular pure groundwater and groundwater influenced by surface. It's about the same as just taking water out of the lake. And the cost of managing that for a purveyor is horrendously different. So I'm just, it's, you gotta treat the water, you have to test the treatment daily. I test my water once a month for bacteria, and we can draw water out of the aquifer. If I had it chlorinated, I'd have to test the water every single day. I'm just gonna, I just wondered, Gilmer and Spokane or in Washington State, have they determined that the people who have wells downstream from these tanks are clear down into the aquifer? Are they treating that like groundwater influenced by surface or still like groundwater? I just don't know, maybe somebody would have that answer.
Yeah, I think that would be a great question for Department of Ecology.
Right, it would be, yeah.
As you know, I worked for the DEQ drinking water program for 24 years, Terry, and I'm very familiar with the regulations. And as a water purveyor, I know that if our wells were also to become surface water influence, and North Kootenai has 23 wells, the cost of treatment would be at least $1 million a well.
That's what I wanted. I don't have $1 million for my well.
No, and North Kootenai is a nonprofit, so, yes. So that was the second. The third site was off Broadway and Sprague, and you may be familiar with this one from I-90. There's also reports of fish stocking in this one. And then the fourth site is off of Havana. And this site is within one well capture zone. So after Jeremy's talk, we began working with Panhandle Health District and IDEQ to research the surface mining regulations over the aquifer. And what we found was that Idaho Department of Lands regulates surface mining in the state of Idaho. And Panhandle Health District staff reached out to Andy Moore, who's the Mineral Lands Program Manager with IDL, and he provided a summary of the regulatory scope, which is here. So essentially that scope includes a reclamation plan prior to breaking ground to ensure that the post-mining landscape is stable, it supports a self-sustaining vegetative cover, and is not going to contribute to surface water degradation. But it's essentially designed to keep the slopes stable, not necessarily to protect a sole source aquifer. He did indicate that there could be other county or local restrictions on the depth, and when we researched that, that was when we found that there weren't any. DEQ helped us by reviewing 32 quarry permits over the aquifer that were provided between 1978 and 2018, and only a few of those permits had any had bottom pit floor to groundwater separations. And of the permits that did reference the separation, they ranged from about 10 to 40 feet. There was one that referenced a 50-foot separation, but it was unclear based on the cross-sectional drawing that they provided exactly what that was. Mr. Moore with IDL also explained that there were a lot of open pit mining areas in southeast Eagle, Idaho that had actually been transitioned to high-end residential development. And of course, this isn't a sole source aquifer or an Idaho sensitive resource aquifer, but there were some reports that support fisheries in these areas as well. He did indicate that there were probably county or city zoning, planning and zoning requirements that were overseeing these activities. So a summary of the existing permits over the aquifer that I wanted to share. This is where DEQ, based on DEQ's information, this is where we're seeing the highest permitted density. And each of these yellow thumbtacks that you can see on the screen, do you see those?
Where you see the highest what?
This is the highest density of mining permits, yeah. So each of these yellow thumbtacks is actually a surface mining permit in this area. And out of all of these permits, only 2 have depth to water requirements. One is for 45 feet, the other is 25 feet. The others do not have any pit depth to groundwater requirement. DEQ helped me look at the IDWR well depths in this area, and the well depths are rather shallow here. The depth to groundwater is approximately 80 feet. There is another mining site at Highway 95 in Corbin Junction. Again, this permit does not have a depth to groundwater established. And then there is another area, North Graysberry Road. There is no minimum depth to groundwater from the bottom of this operation, but the permit does indicate state water quality standards will be maintained at all times during the life of the operation, and that DEQ will be notified. The permit also indicates the mine will be approximately 190 feet deep without groundwater present. The estimated depth to groundwater in this area is 230 feet. So that would leave approximately at a 40 feet buffer. So we definitely are evaluating that a regulatory gap exists, And we do support the proposed Kootenai County Surface Mining Code amendments to bolster the aquifer protection. We've prepared the recommendations before you in consultation with DEQ, Panhandle Health District, and Kootenai County. So essentially, we've reached out to DEQ as per the Aquifer Protection District's memorandum of agreement for technical guidance on establishing that 50-foot separation. So if this is a good time, we can certainly, I know you wanted to find out where that 50-foot separation, and if Seth is willing, maybe he could come up and talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really critical criticism in here, is that it's arbitrary and capricious, which is, those are buzz terms, of course, under admin law to kick this thing out of court. So my question is, what scientific data and information do you have to support 50-foot separation?
Thank you. I would just say, again, my name is Seth Oliver, I'm a geologist for Idaho DEQ. I'd just say for the 50 feet in particular, again, this is one of those, again, you're in an area where you're regulating for distance over a large area, right? So we have the Rathbun Prairie, it's 270 square miles. For area covering, again, so where do you come up with a vertical setback distance? And again, I would say we have three sort of, again, there's many instances, and again, Terry can probably, he's probably seen many environmental reports, but in the prairie, we have kind of three specific reports. One is a 2016 report from Gary Stevens from Idaho DEQ. He did sort of he was kind of tasked with doing analysis for threats to aquifer contamination from petroleum sources specifically, so it's sort of tangential to, specifically gravel mining, but it's like, what poses a threat when we have a spill over a dry land when it's not raining over the prairie? And again, it's sort of tick the big boxes of, what if a back and oil train crashed? What if like the Yellowstone pipeline were to burst? And what if we had like a small, a semi-tanker rollover on the highway? So I kind of went through those three scenarios of like the 2 to 9,000 gallon spill, and then I went through like 30,000 crude oil spill, and then I went through kind of actually unintuitively the more dangerous one, which is a pinhole leak in the oil pipeline, which is 50 gallons per day, which goes a lot further, mostly because of the mechanics of wetting fronts and basically drying and wetting soil mechanics. But yeah, the long story short was when you have a big spill, and when it's not raining with any of this, even a 30,000 gallon spill of crude oil doesn't penetrate too far right away within, a 10 to 40 days span, right? Obviously, 30,000 gallons of crude oil on the ground is urgent, but given dry conditions, it's not raining, as soon as it's, storming and raining at the time, sort of all bets are off, and with preferential flow paths, and, it can go places you don't want to go, but, in a day, sunny day in August where it hasn't rained in 10 weeks, or 8 weeks, or 6 weeks, or whatever it may be, 2,000 to 30,000 gallon spill all at once on the ground is manageable. Obviously, you respond to it with urgency, and the vertical depths that it gets to is, within a week.
Are you saying manageable with a 50-foot vertical setback? Or you just?
Right, yeah, I would say manageable in that, it doesn't go to 100 feet depths. It goes somewhere, again, depending on all the variables of, is it crude oil, is it gasoline, is it a solvent, depending on the chemical, the different viscosities, right?
Well, this is what I'm focused on. I don't want to unfocus anything else, but the criticism is 50 feet is arbitrary and capricious. So what I'm really wanting to know is why 50 feet? And I think what you're telling me is that relates to the infiltration rate that may vary based upon weather and so forth.
Yeah, I would say the average infiltration rate of petroleum, I'll just throw that out there, on dry soil, in average conditions for the Rathbun Prairie is 10 feet per day. So if you have, you take 2,000 gallons of diesel, and you dump it on the ground here, in 5 days it'll have gone 50 feet depth.
It's a little confusing to me because there was about 5 months ago, we had a hearing where I had someone from River I asked them about the infiltration rate in the Rathbun Prairie given the gravel soil.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenally fast, according to them.
Yes, I would say that was, that might have been the velocity, once it's already in the water. So this is different from being, this is dry soil mechanics,
No, I'm
basically.
talking about you have a spill on top, how long does it take you to put off?
Right, yeah, again, this will be a long conversation. Basically, the largest variable there is soil moisture. So if, the way I always describe this when I kind of teaching this concept is watering your plant, your house plants. If you haven't watered a house plant in 3 weeks, and you take a cup of water and you dump that water on it, it's not gonna take any of that water. The water's gonna spill over the top on the plant, it's gonna come out. However, if you slowly water that plant, diligently, and you hit that cup of water, you dump it on it, that's not gonna spill out as, conspicuously as it would if it was completely dry. And so the same thing happens, with the Rathrum Prairie. And so if, there's lots of soil moisture and the water, the ground is wetted, diesel will also infiltrate a lot quicker. And so that variable is gonna vary. If you're near a creek, there's kind of ambient soil moisture, and so if, say, this spill happened next to Hauser Creek, that infiltration will be a lot faster because that soil is wetted already. Whereas if we're in the middle of a farm irrigation thing in the prairie, it's August and the sun's beating on it, it's gonna take a lot longer for that to infiltrate.
And I appreciate it, we would be here for months to talk about all the variables and everything.
Yeah.
And I still wouldn't understand, because I'm not an agronomist.
Yeah.
But we're asked to scrutinize the 50 feet. So my question is, why 50 feet? Why not 45? Why not 60? Why not 100?
Right.
Why 50?
I would say, well, the 3 reports I have kind of support, I would say within the ballpark of 40 to 60 feet. I want to give you like a low range and high range. 40 to 60 feet, it's like that. If you're going to force me to, again, I'm a regulator, I just
am
follow the
going to
rules.
force you in the
Fair
corner
enough.
and say, why 50? And are you going to tell me, because based on the scientific
Yeah.
reports and the data in there,
Uh-huh.
given all the variables you're talking about, and so between 40 and 60 is a reasonable area?
Yeah, I'll give it the most recent one. We had a spill in August of 2024. We had 2,000 gallons of diesel rollover south of Spirit Lake on Highway 41. We had to shut down the highway to do cleanup. We couldn't get permits from ITD in long, so the spill happened on Friday, right? Tanker rolls over, it's dropped 400 gallons of gas, 2,000 gallons of diesel. We couldn't start excavating until Monday morning. That was to no fault of overgrown, it just started going for the permit. You can't just shut down a highway to clean up 2,000 gallons of diesel. And so by the time they excavated, they were only permitted to excavate down to 20 feet to remove the soil. It was contaminated diesel and gas, and about a third of the mass was below 20 feet. So we left about 700 gallons of diesel below 20 feet. So that was 2.5 days later, and we already had 700 gallons. A third of that volume was below 20 feet in 2 days.
And how far down did you get to?
To 20 feet. Because they couldn't encroach on the road bed. ITD was like, no, we're not gonna let you do that. So we said, okay, we had to kind of manage the other those. So monitor the soil, the soil, and then do some modeling to see where that 600 gallons of diesel is going to go. And there, depth of groundwater was 400 feet. And there was a bunch of kind of silt and clay layers, so it wasn't like in a zone that we were particularly, it wasn't like next to a whole water system or anything like that. So, that was part of the most recent kind of anecdotal or comparable kind of data we have. And yeah, the models support that. So the APD did a kind of a sensitive aquifer recharge area. So basically all the lakes that contribute creeks into the aquifer to recharge. And I had a professor from the U of I kind of do some modeling. And again, given you're not doing the slow burn scenario, which is the worst case scenario, due to the hydraulics, like large spills would, in the models, go up to 35 to 50 feet. And then they would kind of just sit there, and then they would slowly, as it rained, would kind of like percolate low levels of gas. Again, it's petroleum.
So that's the other reason why 50 feet is it tends to stop.
It tends to stop, yeah. If you don't have a slow burn, if you don't have like a pinhole that's constantly feeding source to it, which kind of helps the hydraulics to move further down, it sort of just comes to a standstill at 50, and then as it rains, that rain will pick up some of it in a halo and bring lower levels of gas, not like, pure gas coming down the outer coast, or in like a immobile blob, so to speak. And And then, yeah, so in the 2016 report, that was sort of the finding. Again, it's gonna vary by, you tweak the variables, it's gonna be somewhere in that 40 to 60 feet below ground surface range. And then with the Hauser report, which was a separate person entirely, came to the same conclusion. And then from our observations in recent spills, that sort of is what happened.
So,
Yeah.
So bottom line is, it wasn't just a capricious, taking a stab at something. It came from, some experimentation and previous knowledge, and so therefore it would be defensible in court.
I think it was a data-driven determination.
Perfect, thank you.
If I may ask, is the gravel mine in Spokane that was on your presentation, is it still in operation, the ones that have the aquifer exposed?
Yes,
Still in operation?
yes.
Are there any known or documented cases of widespread contamination that are traced back to that surface mine, or any of those surface mines that have accumulated water at the bottom of their pits?
Not that I am aware of, but they do pose a significant susceptibility to contamination. And there are some, I wasn't sure which mine you were speaking of when you asked. Some of those mines are active, and I believe one is no longer active.
Okay, thank you. With regard to the model that was used to determine the 50-foot buffer, you cited occasion where there was a very large spill on the highway, and then also the possibility of a pipeline rupture. Are there any, because what we're talking about here is specifically about gravel miners in the mining zone. So I don't imagine the quantity of pollutants that would be generated from mining operations would be on the same scale as a pipeline rupture or a train derailment or something like that. So how is that, how is that information used to determine the 50-foot buffer directly applicable to the operations of surface miners? When my thought is that they're not storing large amounts of fuel. Of course, their machinery, their fuel tanks can probably be hundreds of gallons, I would assume. There would be diesel, solvents, hydraulic fluid, petroleum-based stuff. So, how is that criteria that you use to determine the 50-foot buffer, how does that apply to the surface miners when there doesn't appear to be direct evidence to their operations actually contaminating the ground?
That's a really good question. I would say, I'm gonna default to Suzanne on this, but I'll just say, for me, my task was, hey, I wasn't tasked with, what are they storing? Is this even likely? Talking about risk and likelihood and susceptibility. That's not my expertise. I'm just sort of the hydraulics professional in that regard. I would say, I think Suzanne would segue into this, it's just, what is the plan for reclamation? Is it, are they going to groundwater and then just going to be left open as it is in Washington? That wasn't the question. I was just basically tasked with, what can be reasonably responded to if there was an event that threatens drinking water. Do you need, how much vertical setback to groundwater is necessary? If there's drinking water that's within the capture zone.
I want to Hudson Lisa. It's a good line of inquiry.
Yeah.
And to follow up with that, or emphasize, have you considered spills versus operations like open pit?
What do you mean by spills first?
Well, let me, have you considered different types and volumes of contamination?
We have-
For example, that was given, a 100-gallon you know, fuel storage tank versus these horrible spills are direct.
Yeah, and again, we operate under that all the time. Our response, like de minimis spills are common, 25 gallons, the reportable quantity is 25 gallons. We're not trying to, rake people over the coals on, 40-gallon spills, 50-gallon spills. We're very, again, at least DEQ, I appreciate urgency because we're not doing that. Again, I think for this specific scenario, this is the future of drinking water quality. If there is again, I'll just say, severity of, again, I'm sort of, my job is, it's very difficult, but it's also very unique in that we have the Rathman Prairie Aquifer kind of guidelines in place, and that many of the wells, every single well that I talk about in the city of Post Falls or Coeur d'Alene, one well serves 2,000 to 3,000 people. And so I don't want to be, overly cautious and say, hey, we can't do anything here. But at the same time, it's very easy to shut down 4,000 people's drinking water. And so trying to strike the balance of, for instance, we had the sewage spill, the TDS, they hit a main line right upstream from Beck Well number 9, and we were really concerned that we were gonna have to shut the well off. Tell Post Falls under their, and again, their recourse is suing this person who did this.
I think we're all sensitive to
Yeah.
the reality that if you screw it up here, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're gonna err, you're gonna err on the side of caution. I think we all get that. But there's legitimate criticism here and inquiry, it seems to me, and it's in the letter, the Kelsey's letter. One of the criticisms is, why do you lump us in with other mining operations that are completely different than what we do? We're just breaking ground on the ground, we're not probably gonna have big spills and that kind of thing. So back to the arbitrary and capricious standard, what scientific data do we have that relates, you're talking about these big spills. My colleague here has brought up a good point. What about these operations that probably aren't gonna have big spills? Why the 50 feet? It comes back to the 50 feet for them. Why? And I'm looking for a scientific basis for that.
Yeah, and again, I would just say the 50 feet is just a reasonable response time given what we've had with a spill. Again, that's spoken to petroleum or again, chemical concern.
Any spill, large spill, small spill?
Like I said, small spills in particular, that we're not concerned, with a de minimis spill that's, someone is filling up, the quarry truck or the excavator and they spill some on the ground. That's not a reportable quantity. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, a threat to a regional drinking water source. Like I said, that's large spills, pipelines, and then like I say, an above ground storage tank perhaps, that's leaking into roofs.
But does that apply to the open pit?
I don't think that's my,
I think
Speak up, Terry.
The question, and I think you guys are appropriate with the question, but what's your reportable quantity? See, these guys are living, and so are all the water purveyors, are living with the requirements of the federal government that are passed down to the state, so the state continues to have their primacy. And the reportable quantity is only 25 gallons, not 2,000 gallons. You see how tight these requirements are for the drinking water people, because, I just had meetings with them last Wednesday, and sat there for 8 hours talking about whether or not we need to report what kind of fittings are on your plumbing in case some lead or copper might get into your drinking water in the house. You're talking about minute parts per trillion, parts per billion. And so we have to be very careful, the arbitrary capricious thing I think is important, but what we really have to be careful, what are the impacts going to be on both Department of Ecology and DEQ in Idaho as far as maintaining primacy and enforcing federal requirements down to these minute, tiny little amounts of things that show up in the drinking water, and whether it makes any sense or not, they're gonna have to pass those on to all the water purveyors, and like you said, to treat one of these big wells, $1 million. See, and so it doesn't sound reasonable to us common sense people, but it isn't common sense. That's what I'm trying to point out. It isn't common sense. Those rules, in many cases, don't seem to make a whole lot of common sense, but that's beside the point. It's the rule of the law. So just be careful with this, because 25 gallons is a tiny, tiny amount, and they have to report after that.
Yeah, and I would just say another kind of comment off topic of that, where it's sort of relevant in a way is conduits to groundwater. Again, abandoning wells, it's, a lot of times, you know, you drill a well in the ground and then you're done using it, it has to be abandoned. And so, this is just sort of eliminating conduits to groundwater. Again, whether that's a stretch or not, for me, that's IDWR's purview, but for us, you know, when a site closes down, you make sure, you know, there's a spill, there's no wells in the area that are gonna bring that, that contaminant or whatever directly to drinking water. And this is sort of an extension of, you know, preventing a conduit to drinking water. Again, I just think, I would be very, you know, having open water directly to the aquifer, again, we're lucky that for the most part, barring the very close state line range, the drinking water, the depth of groundwater is quite deep. You know, usually in the 200-foot range at a minimum, and then it starts to get into, you know, the low hundreds and 90 feet as you get very next to state line. And so the hope was, this is just sort of a kind of common sense idea, you know, not to have open aquifer where, you know, someone can introduce any contaminant to the downstream sources, whether that be a well, or private well.
So other recommended measures would be required compliance with the current Idaho groundwater rule, sensitive resource aquifer degradation, required compliance with the Idaho wastewater rules, and required compliance with the Kootenai County Critical Materials Ordinance, which would require secondary. And then lastly, as far as permitting, maintain conditional use permits, term of 5 years, and then for the permittees to provide a written response plan for addressing spills and documentation of routine spill response training to park staff. Yes.
So, you said a lot of the pits are not, it would not be up to date with what's going on. Would they be grandfathered in? Or what would we do with those?
It's my understanding that they may be looked at when the conditional use permit is reapplied for every 5 years, but perhaps Kootenai County could speak more eloquently to that than I.
Yeah, it would be the expectation that the standards do apply to all mining zone pits and conditional use permits. And so it would be the expectation that they comply with the new standard.
So, but one of them was what you said, within 30 or 40 feet? So,
What would happen?
yeah, I mean, would they be shut down, or?
For situations that are existing, in which a different standard applies, they'd be considered non-conforming. And they could allow to continue to operate in that same manner, except for they wouldn't be able to enlarge or expand the non-conformity.
Quick question with regard to a couple of the recommendations here. One being the protection of groundwater during and after operation as per EPA sole source aquifer and Idaho state sensitive resource designations. Aren't the mines already subject to that regulation? Because the aquifer has already been declared a special.
Yes.
Okay, so then, okay.
APD's recommendation was just to reinforce that in Kootenai County.
Okay.
So
So similar question then with the next 2 points as well. It required compliance with Idaho groundwater rules, sensitive resource aquifer designation. They're already required to be in compliance with Idaho groundwater.
That's correct.
Okay, and then also required compliance with the current Idaho wastewater rules.
Also.
They're already required, so, those from a, okay, thank you.
Yes, that's a great question. Any other questions? I just, last slide, I just wanted to, oh, yes.
I mean, I'm still struggling with this 50 feet thing, a little bit, when I have something to say about that, with the scientific basis for 50 feet. I mean, it could be you have adjacent facilities that could spill, and would flow into the, the pit, for example. Or it could be, I don't know, I can think of up. Or it could be you have large open pit mines that actually do have 20,000 gallons of fuel still, I don't know. But that, I'm looking for facts that support, why the 50 feet. I get so I get some facts. I get that based upon the 3 studies that were mentioned and the time of which petroleum ground is permitted, and they tend to sort of stop at 50 feet. I get all that, so that's supported. But I'm trying to answer the issue raised here of why open pit mine, why are they being targeted with this 50 feet and maybe not others? And why are they the culprits?
I guess, I'm not a hydrogeologist either, pardon me for that, but in my own layman's terms, I recognize that our aquifer is unconsolidated. We don't have an aquitard, we don't have a clay lens layer to protect it. So that there isn't a buffer, if you will. And the surface mining activities are removing some of the natural filtration that is previously established naturally through the floods that were deposited, that we rely on for some additional protection. As we remove that, APD's question to DEQ was, if we're removing that, how do we still do that but protect the aquifer from vulnerability? And really, the biggest vulnerability is, in my mind, is not being able to get to a spill. And so in speaking with our experts to get that technical guidance, that 50-foot depth to groundwater would provide a very realistic time frame for a response to remove contamination. And that's, I qualify that with not being a hydrogeologist.
A response to what? Response to a 10-gallon spill of 50, what's the response
Would be
to what?
something greater than 25 gallons. Any other questions? Yes.
The mines that you cited in Idaho that do have established buffers, how were those buffers determined? Because you had mentioned that there was some variability. One specific mine was maybe at 20 or 30 feet, and another one was at 40. How were those levels established in the first place?
Well, I don't think I can answer that question because those levels would have been identified with the permit application through Idaho Department of Lands.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes.
Do you know what criteria they use? That was a good point, because you're proposing one size fits all.
Right, and if we were back up to that slide, if you will, then keep going back, it's the, a little bit more. Here it is. This is the criteria that IDL uses to determine, this is their existing regulation.
Yeah, if I could answer that.
Yes, please.
In the permits that
Oh, Kevin, would you come up to introduce yourself
Oh, yeah.
since we're in a public hearing? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Kevin Ardall, I'm the remediation manager for the Coeur d'Alene IDEQ office. And when I reviewed the permits, there was a couple of them that had a note that there was a vertical separation requirement between the pit floor and groundwater level, but that was about it. There was no qualifying, information beyond that. So we really couldn't tell exactly what that, where that requirement came from. It could be somebody who was just, had an interest in groundwater and that just happened to be in that permit, but like Suzanne said earlier, I think there was only a handful of the 35 or 33 that we looked at.
That happens.
That had a setback.
No.
No.
So they don't do any type of study to find out on the ground they're working on or anything to see what saturation there is or anything like that to determine the?
Yeah, the IDL permits, we just reviewed the permits itself. We don't know what their criteria or thought process is when they go through that.
Okay.
Is there some wording in either Idaho, law or federal law that speaks to, non-degradation of the special aquifer? I'm sorry, I don't.
No, you're absolutely right. There's, the EPA has established sole source designation protections over the aquifer, and the state of Idaho has also established sensitive resource aquifer degradation. Essentially, those regulations state that the aquifer cannot be degraded.
Okay, so then, if the aquifer cannot be degraded, then what, and this goes back to trying to establish if there's actual contamination coming from the exposed water of the aquifer, in the mining sites. Those sites that you cited that have the bottom of the pits have filled up with water, I would think that if it had been established that the aquifer was being degraded from the water in the bottom of the pit, then either state or the federal regulators or enforcement would have come in to take action. So again, we're trying to establish the true danger of these operations to the aquifer. So are the mining activities already covered by state regulation and also federal regulation in the form of them being required to not degrade the aquifer? So you see what I mean?
I think what I hear you asking me is there already Idaho regulation because of the sensitive resource aquifer designation and the EPA designation that the mining activities cannot degrade the aquifer. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
And so no one can degrade the aquifer by state or by federal regulation. These activities are, especially in Spokane, are alarming to us because they're exposing the aquifer to atmosphere, which means they're exposing the aquifer to surface contamination. And we're essentially eliminating the natural filtration that currently exists above the groundwater.
It seems like the federal and state law created generalities, and now what we're trying to do is create specifics.
That would be a very good way of saying it too.
Yeah. I think that the key to this thing is you don't have to have a bad test downstream from where you expose the aquifer to the surface to be ordered to act like the surface water exposure is causing a problem, whether there's any proof that there is or not. That's the way these laws are. You don't have, in other words, if I had my well downstream from a pit and my tests were all still real good, but the pit was in the aquifer, I'd be told I have a groundwater source influenced by surface water, and therefore I have to do all the tests that I don't have to do now. See, it isn't a matter of actually proving anything, it's the idea that there's a possibility of something like this happening. And then they implement all these regulations.
Yeah, I get that, but, I mean, there's a possibility that we could get hit driving to the store. And so, but if we all drove tanks 2 miles an hour, we probably wouldn't get hit, we'd be safe. So, I mean, what we're trying to balance here, if the open pit mining guys are up here, and maybe they're gonna be, what they're gonna be telling us is, every foot you have as a buffer takes away umpteen thousands of dollars of my ability to make profit, okay? And takes away needed gravel and sand for cement and all of that we need. And, you know, you're depriving society of a resource, and depriving me of my property, and you're depriving me of ability to keep my business going. And that's what I'm never gonna hear, is that. So you're trying to, so every foot buffer you have, I'm sure they're gonna be saying to us, that's cutting into all of those things. So the balance here is, you know, how do you get that balance, and how do you scientifically prove the balance? Admittedly, with the concern that if you mess it up, it's a big problem, and you can't undo it. At least you can't undo it very easily. So, I mean, that's what I struggle with, you know, and, this isn't a political thing. This is sort of like what makes scientific sense, and, you know, what's in the best interest of the county. Philosophically, of course, you do have the notion that you don't want to limit people's freedoms unless you really have to. That's sort of like related to these questions of why 50 feet and why open pit, why, you know, so the more data, I guess, that we have, the more, we don't need to be hydraulics, but the more data we have, the more specificity we have as to why this buffer and why this is needed at all. It's helpful to me.
And I think, to kind of answer your question a little bit is, if you look at what activities and what equipment are down in the pit, let's say you have an excavator, I don't know what the fuel capacity of those are, 50, 100 gallons or what have you. Let's just say there was a full tank that ruptured for some reason, and there was an immediate spill. How far is that gonna get in that kind of scenario? Also, do you service the vehicles down in the bottom of the pit?
This is the kind of stuff I'm wondering, you're hitting the nail on the head there.
Yeah, or do they come out of the pit at the end of the day, and is that fueling done,
Right.
100 feet off the rim, or is that done down in the pit? That fuel truck might carry 1,000 gallons, 2,000 gallons, and it goes down the pit and there's an accident, a spill. Those are the kind of scenarios that would help DEQ model that and maybe come up with a better, result than just, the 50 foot is backed up with science.
I hear that, but what you're saying there is the kind of stuff I'm really looking for.
Right.
Because it may be you say, oh, we did a study, 50 feet isn't enough. It should be 70 feet, or 50 feet is too much. We only need to go, 40 or whatever. But anyway, that would be helpful to have that kind of information.
I think that what you're describing, though, as far as operations in the pit goes, as far as refueling or washing the vehicles and those things, I think that would be addressed here by point 5 in requiring and monitoring and containment removal of contaminants associated with open pit mining in compliance with Kootenai County's critical materials ordinance. Which I think that would be the part that would specifically pertain to refueling operations. And those types of activities of operations. And when we're still trying to determine the appropriateness of the buffer, the 50-foot plus or minus buffer.
Could I introduce Jamie Martin with Idaho Health District? Because she oversees the critical materials program, and she might be able to answer that question for you. Thank you.
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit. So, we do have threshold criteria for that ordinance. So if they're under a certain volume, it depends on the chemical. 595 gallons is kind of the smallest amount that requires secondary containment. So if they're under that, they don't have to have secondary containment. So there is still potential for, primary containment, one container that could spill in the bottom of the pit. Vehicle wash, that also has requirements to it. So when you have non-domestic wastewater from vehicle wash, that has to be captured somewhere. So most of these pits, I've been out in a few of them, I've never seen them have a set up wash bay in their pit. It's up on the surface, or they take their fleet off-site to a commercial car wash. So there is still some not loopholes, but gaps in the coverage, even with the critical materials.
Okay, so then would that point 5 that I just read, would that address that specifically?
The secondary containment?
Yeah,
Yes, they would be required to have secondary containment if they're over that threshold volume.
over the threshold.
Yes, and that's dependent on the type of chemicals they have on site. So we have, just regular SDS chemicals. The threshold for that is 595 gallons. We have circle chemicals, it's 120 gallons and above, has to have secondary containment. And then we have the extremely hazardous, which is the smallest one. So, that 595.
Jenny, could you clarify that for heavy equipment, there is no secondary containment standard for fuel tanks that are energizing heavy equipment?
Correct, yes, for onboard fuel tank, there's no secondary containment. So if they had, activators down there, there's no secondary containment within that. It's typically fuel tanks, oftentimes they're using, slip tanks, which do fall under an exemption because they're considered mobile. So they could have maybe a 2,000 gallon mobile slip tank, that does not require secondary containment because it's mobile, so. Does that make sense?
If it's full, they can take it into the pit and there's no limit to the volume.
Correct.
So are the operators already required to be in compliance with the critical materials ordinance?
In Kootenai County parcels, yes,
Yeah.
yes. But they may have quantities of chemicals less than that threshold down in their pit. And if they're under that threshold, they're not required to have secondary containment.
Okay, so then, is there anything in this proposed, ordinance that would address the lower quantities in the pit?
In terms of requiring secondary containment, or?
Yeah, or, because all I'm seeing here is just that that they will be required to be in compliance with Kootenai County's critical materials ordinance, but they're already operating in compliance with that, correct?
Yes, they are. But I think, maybe the point I'm trying to make is that there's still potential for contamination even with the critical materials ordinance. So if they have less of that volume,
And you're right, that's why you have the 50 feet, because you could have someone that is violent to what this, or doesn't pay attention to it, or
Yeah.
has smaller quantities and the aggregate of them create a little problem. And that's why you have this 50-foot buffer to have time that covers this.
yeah, for example, they could have maybe an above ground storage tank in the bottom of their pit that's only 500 gallons. Per the ordinance, that does not require secondary containment. So if that were to leak in the pit, you could have 500 gallons of gasoline going down, so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you.
If I could, Mr. Bateson, before we move on to our public comment period, I did receive a couple of late comments with regards to the surface mining ordinance amendment. One from the Coeur d'Alene tribe and one from the city of Post Falls. I'd like to go ahead and just enter those into the record now.
Read into the record is PC 1001.
Actually, each one should have its own exhibit number.
Oh,
Go to,
okay. PC 1001 and PC 1002.
yeah, first one is from the Coeur d'Alene tribe, second one is from the Post Falls.
So the tribe is the 1001. Okay. Have you reviewed these, Ben?
I have.
Okay. Would you mind just going over it with us?
Sure. I can also bring it up on the screen so that
That'd be
everybody
great.
else
Thank you.
can see them. I just received the city of Post Falls comment just before the hearing, so I still have it in my email. so, a synopsis of the city of Post Falls comments. They do draw water, of course, from the Mountain Prairie Aquifer, and they are generally supportive of the proposed amendment. There was a recommendation that they had, with regards to some information that an applicant or property owner should provide as part of, this review, which would include, some site plan information showing the anticipated pit floor elevation at the lowest point, and also evidence of the highest known aquifer water table elevation. I think that is a brief synopsis of their comments. With regards to the Coeur d'Alene tribe, let's see. Sorry.
They seem to have the same question, where did the 50-foot come from? But
Yeah,
again, the
I'm sorry, I'm not finding the copy on my email right now, but,
Is in the opposite, yes.
yeah, it's supportive of
A larger buffer.
a larger buffer, meaning that the 50-foot is possibly not adequate, and, they think that it should be potentially greater, depending, of course, though, on, additional information. They disagree, from the comments that were received from the public, that, during and after operation, should not be in question, as that operators would still be liable in, situations where they're operating. There's a provision that says that, for areas that are over the sensitive aquifer recharge areas, that additional information may be required of the property owner. They would like to, change that language from may to a requirement of shall. And then, with regards to monitoring, they believe it would be appropriate to have some baseline monitoring, so to set up a baseline before operations begin, so that they have something to compare it to.
Maybe this is something for Pat, going back to that comment too, from the tribe, that parties remain liable for environmental damage and federal environmental law as long after the resource is exhausted.
They're referring to CERCLA liability, something Mr. Harwood is very familiar with.
CERCLA is the release of a hazardous substance under any circumstances, so it's all encompassing law that doubles everything else up.
So what is the time frame? Is it just in perpetuity?
Yeah, anytime you can prove there's been a release of a hazardous substance from the site. I mean, I've got some that I worked on at mines that were 100 years old.
But there has to be a proof of harm or contamination or something in that there was actually damage in order for that to apply. Yes?
I
No?
believe so. Although,
That in order for that to apply, that there have to be evidence of damage or contamination. It's environmental damage, so this would be.
Yeah, you'd have to prove some way by testing, for example, that there was a release of a hazardous substance. Now, the determination of the effect of that release is all part of the CERCLA process of analyzing how big the problem you have, what action you're going to take. But you would have to have some proof of a release of a hazardous substance.
Any questions to public comments. And I will start off with the wish to speak and opposed. And then we'll go to in favor, if there are any. Each person, as you come in to speak, you will have 3 minutes. And there will be a time, a beeper or some noise to let you know that you are out of time. So Elizabeth Tellison, wish to speak, is opposed.
Chair Bateson, do you mind if we make a decision as to which ordinance they're maybe?
Great, yes, please do. And give your name, your city, and yes, which ordinance you are speaking in reference to, please.
Of course. Elizabeth Tellison with Wisdom Cachet here in Berlin, Idaho, on behalf of my client, Youth Development, speaking to ORA 26-0002, the mining amendment. I want to first clarify, the box checking for opposition is a little misleading here. And I want to be very clear that neither I nor my clients think that protection of the aquifer is a bad idea. So to be very, very clear on that point, certainly the sole source aquifer is important to all of us. It is important to our economies. It is important to our own lives and families. We do not diminish that in any way. The flip side of that is, of course, regulating in a way that is both lawful and respectful of both your comprehensive plan and the state of Idaho's preference, goals, objectives, and policies towards preserving private property rights, and regulating in a way that is clear, that is based on specific information, that is based on known problems, and not going about and not to diminish at all the purpose, but a bit of a chicken little mentality. I mean, anything could go wrong at any single moment and we can all die. Yes, very true. But we do want to be very cognizant of the fact that you are governing your businesses, you are governing your economic development, you are governing the use of your natural resources, which continue to make Idaho a wonderful place to live, a prosperous place to live. And that is of equal importance and does warrant a very careful consideration and balancing of the interests that you're talking about here. And so in that vein, to the extent I run out of time, and if you guys have questions you want me to hit on first, we do have a number of people who have signed up to speak. If we can combine time, we would be happy to do that, so not to start and stop. That being said, a lot of the speculation and assumptions about what's going on at these mining operations, I think, is unsupported and ill-founded. That the secondary containment is a best management practice and is followed in many of the pits, particularly my clients' pits who operate across the country and across the world. Specifically to the 50 feet, it does seem very arbitrary considering the use that you are trying to regulate. And we do advise a careful consideration of exactly what it is you're concerned about. If secondary containment of chemicals in a pit floor is the concern, then make your regulations specific to that. That is understandable, it is easy to apply, it is easy to enforce. I've offered the Spokane County regulations for reference that do very much this. Let's keep the stormwater out of the pit floor. You need to do a trench around. May I continue? Sure.
Is someone willing to give up their time?
Mr. Beck?
I have a question.
Sure.
I totally get your client's criticism of the 50 feet, and we've heard scientific information supportive of it, including this notion that we've heard. What does your client say is the proper setback, and what's the scientific data to support it?
To be perfectly honest, and the operators are here to talk about it, the Sullivan Pit is presently operating in the aquifer. And there is no evidence of contamination. There has been no reported contamination. So to some respects, we think none is necessary, but we operate across the world with setbacks that vary. And so we don't think there is a right answer, because the problem and the issue that's trying to be addressed is that uncertainty. Is there a train car spilling within 100 feet of where you're mining? is there a containment of chemical in a pit floor that could potentially leak or fail? And do we need a secondary?
So what your position, your client's position is that we don't need a setback because there's scientific evidence based upon that we have no contamination with open pit mines that breach the aquifer. That's your evidence, and there's been no contamination. So why do you think there would be, why do you think you need a setback? Is that kind of the position?
I think that is a fair summary, and again, you know, the caution of the reclamation question, I think is fair because we don't control the sites. Once they are reclaimed, they are reused. Riverstone is an example in all of our.
I get that, but we have
Yeah.
CERCLA that applies, that lives with you forever, so, you know.
Sure, and to that distinction, what's being proposed requires protection, which is an affirmative action. So we do think that the proposal in that regard reaches beyond what CERCLA would do.
I'm not trying to ignore
Yeah.
that,
Okay.
the issue that you have, I'm just separating the issues, you have this 50-foot issue. And I think I understand your client's position and the data it has that it believes supports.
Were you satisfied with my answer?
Well, it's.
I think-
Here's where I'm coming from, it's just a logical analysis that the more data you have to support a setback. I mean, we have the tribe saying, there's not enough data to support 50, it should be more than 50. My question to the tribe would be the same, would be, well, what data do you have to support, what scientific data do you have to support, should be more than 50? My question to you is, what data and scientific data does your client have to support it should be less than 50? And giving me the answer that we have open pit mining that goes down to the aquifer, there's been no contamination, so why would you think you would need a setback? I think that's a legitimate point to be made. And then we have the, you know, points over here that the permeation rates and where it tends to stop at 50 and all of that, and that's scientifically based. So I guess what we gotta do is sort of put all that together and figure out, you know, do we need a setback, and if so, is 50 the right number of feet?
I think that is fair, and I think that is why what has been proposed is not yet ready for adoption. I think it warrants additional analysis, particularly to what is the risk that we are trying to address, and what is the proper way to address it.
And the weakness to your data is that it's only common sense and obvious that if you have a 50-gallon spill of oil or diesel or whatever, out of a farm, this happens, you know, stuff happens. And you have that spill, it goes right into the aquifer if you don't have any separation. So that's the weakness of your position. You know, the arguable weakness of their position is they don't have enough data to justify 50 feet, it's too much, you know, so we got to sort that out, seems to me out of business.
And that is fair, and to be clear, we are not advocating that there should be none.
Right, I get it.
Any other questions? So while one of the additional comments that you see in my letter that I just wanted to point out is you guys are making this effort to look at your mining zone, what is right vis-a-vis the aquifer. It may remove resources from availability, and so one of the points that we've added is what I would call a vague setback requirement to agricultural and rural zone properties of 1,000 feet, where your code does not doesn't at all define what a mining operation is. So if you are doing the balancing to evaluate what is the best thing for North Idaho and for Kootenai County, to take a broader look at how the code is applied, where you are making resources available, and where you are limiting that use, and then maybe pulling them off the table unnecessarily. I don't know where I'm at on time presently, if there are other questions or not.
Just 2 minutes left. Yeah, we have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Labor, but turn to your second issue. What's the real problem with, can you give me the real concern your client has about the ongoing liability to remediate, you know, that section, that part of the proposal?
Sure. So take, for instance, Riverstone.
Okay.
If this code is adopted and a present owner or operator of Riverstone creates a contamination, you are presuming that we now have a responsibility to step in affirmatively and somehow stop it.
That's not how I read it. That,
Okay.
that if a present person buys the land, then they create a contamination. That wouldn't implicate your client, would it?
that's the concern with the language as it's
Okay,
drafted.
well, we should look at it.
Yeah, and that is because I do tend to over analyze, so I don't want to.
I've never been guilty of that.
Good, I'm glad. One of us is gonna be making
I've been
this,
facetious.
I suspect.
Yeah, where is that language?
So I have it, and the page isn't numbered, it is in 1303 in subpart I, subpart 2. It reads protection of groundwater during and after. And then as per the EPA sole source aquifer and Idaho sensitive resource designations. And I will admit, I did not study those to the depth, but largely they are related to ensuring that you are doing what you need to do to protect your aquifer. But so protection of groundwater, and again, protection being an affirmative act. You know, what are you doing to stop somebody from intervening or interceding and creating? And
So your point is that we would need language in there to make it clear that it's gotta be causally related to the operation, your client's operation, right?
Right, and during ownership or something of that nature, recognizing, of course, circles,
I mean, I think that's assumed in that language that, in subsequent user, we couldn't make your client viable. But then again, maybe not, because it could be, for example, I suppose, I don't know, I've never read a pit, but you could have a slope issue. And conduct of the subsequent person combines with the slope issue that your client created a created problem, and you get target messages.
I to wrap my mind around that, I think the concern that I have is imposing an obligation for continued oversight of a site that has been reclaimed and has been sold and put to a different use. So that is where my concern lies when I read and I look at this, knowing that so many mining sites get reclaimed and put to a different use, and that is standard office.
I mean, I think about real life, what happens. I could see where if there was a subsequent issue, it could be alleged that your client's conduct contributed to the problem, even if it was combined with some subsequent owner's actions.
Sure, and being a lawyer, I try to remind my clients that anyone can be sued for anything at any time. This, to me, creates an affirmative obligation that seems beyond what the intent is and what I think is probably lawful.
On the other hand, the argument is if your client created something that creates an ongoing risk to the aquifer, why shouldn't they be burdened with monitoring that risk?
And there, I think we're talking about, is there a setback, and are they, we aren't permitting the new uses. If the mining pit is reclaimed, there is a 50-foot buffer, and an oil refinery gets opened on top of it. We took the resource off under a legitimate permit, but now we're responsible for a land use decision that we have no control over. Thank you for your indulgence. If there are questions from me, I will seek my clients who can answer some more of the operational questions.
I actually have a question and might entail some of the panhandle LDEQ. In line with that, is there a way to properly determine who would be at fault? Is there, with how it's going through, is there testing that can be done if this is old, like an old spill that somehow was just, you said a bubble or whatever it was, that it was just contained, and then somehow the current one actually disturbs it, and so then it goes into that who, and maybe this is a legal question too, then who would be liable on that? Because the first owner created maybe that spill, and let's say it was underneath the reportable requirements, but nothing happened with it. The second owner then does the site disturbance. How would that situation then be handled, and how do we prove that who would be at fault on that?
I'll speak first.
Can you come up, Seth?
Just since you're bringing back up and somebody's already spoken, I think it would be fair to allow, Ms. Ellison, an opportunity to respond as well.
Yes.
I'm saying with liability like that, again, this runs the gamut of, it's a whole kind of gamut of environmental speciality, like environmental law is its own subfield of what we're talking about here. And so Terry can expound upon this, but I mean, we have lots of sites where, you know, they had adjoining operations that were doing the same kind of activity, and they're basically suing each other on whose contamination is whose. Both sites are contaminated, we don't know, they were using the same product, you know, what amount of contamination is whose. And again, you can go tick or tat over that over several decades. And again, subsequent users generally, again, this is a general statement, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of people in this room will know this. When a commercial entity buys new property, usually if they're using funding from a bank will obligate them to do an environmental site assessment. Either called the phase one, and then if they find something in the phase one, which is sort of like the investigative portion, they find something, then they do a phase two, which is a more in-depth investigation, say, hey, there's environmental liability here, don't. So many times banks will require, you know, them to go through environmental liability due diligence. And then, sorry, again, that's.
Well, I just want to add, you know, if you have a report or a release of hazardous substance that's discovered in the future, you know, it's the current landowner that's approached at first by the government to clean up the thing. And if you take a legal action, like by the Justice Department, against that current owner or current operator, then it's kind of behooves them to go after the previous owner. So you kind of sick the current owner on the previous owner when you take that. But you gotta be the person that spilled, that hauled the stuff, produced the contamination, or owning the land. And owning the land that's got the hazardous waste or hazardous substance release on is the very first action that the government usually takes.
So I guess, Pat, then for you, my question would be on their revised language, protection of groundwater during operations and until reclamation is complete, then that would mean at that point, that owner then would say that they are no longer liable for anything that were to happen at that property if something were to happen in the future.
Well, at least under the county code, that would be true.
Okay.
That doesn't, you know, state and federal law supersede that, however, in terms of, you know, liability under those laws.
Okay, and then just for, maybe for all of our purposes here, the county has reclamation due process in place, like Panhandle Health, DEQ, all of that, that once these are no longer in service, that there's something already on the books of what they have to do in order to say that this is reclaimed and this is no longer in operation. Is that correct or no?
It's through Idaho Department of Lands.
Okay, so they do have that. Any other questions?
Council, I have a question for you. If you don't know, that's fine, but it says protection of groundwater during and after operation as per EPA sole source aquifer and Idaho State Sensitive Resource Designation. So what, can you shed light on what more specifically your clients would be obligated to do under EPA sole source aquifer and Idaho State Sensitive Resource Designations? What type of monitoring or what, you know, and the fiscal impact on it?
My short answer is I don't know, because neither of those regulatory schemes, as I have reviewed them, make a affirmative action sort of requirement. You are to do it, you are to take action to protect it, but it is not, thou shalt have a 50-foot buffer, thou shalt have secondary containment. It's not, those regulatory schemes aren't the kind of conduct driven. And so again, what is the protection that is being proposed by Kootenai County to impose?
That's a problem if you don't have specificity as to what's to be expected of the company.
And that really is where it lies, you know, we can only do what is directed and what is known in the code. And if there is this vagueness and there is this ambiguity, and avoiding it is the best first thing to do, and say what you mean and make as expressly and specifically as possible. So, and I think the liability question, of course, the number of variables that come into that, analysis are,
Well, circle is fairly specific.
yes, and but this isn't CERCLA.
But, yeah, you know, under these, this EPA sole source aquifer and Idaho State Central Resource designations, what obligations an open pit mine would have to continue monitoring or?
Well, sensitive resource aquifer is kind of basically just a designation that allow the creation of an aquifer protection district, which we have. And I'm not familiar enough with the EPA regulations to understand, to know what specific standards.
Would it give the protection district jurisdiction to require them to do something? on a
It's
case-by-case
not,
basis?
that's where the county land use jurisdiction applies. The aquifer protection district basically approves aquifer protection projects, approves budget for those projects. That's their mission. Our mission here under the county's land use jurisdiction is to determine, if there are, whether and what, requirements additional to, what may be required under federal or state law are appropriate to protect the aquifer.
May I speak to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're gonna talk about, what I'm worried about is what she's raising here, that we don't know what we're being required to do.
Yeah.
That's legitimate.
So, I'm hoping I can add a little bit of context, and maybe my colleagues at DEQ can support this as well. The sensitive resource designation ties back to Idaho's groundwater quality rule. So it allows for measures above and beyond the Idaho groundwater quality rule to be implemented to protect a sensitive, designated sensitive aquifer. So that's where we have like our critical materials program is coming at the local level to add additional protective measures to
But
this.
let me give you an example. You have an open pit mine that they sell to the developer. 7 years later, it's discovered that there's this bad stuff that's in the ground. And there's the allegation that, her client caused that 7 years before. What specific requirement do they have to, the language of the statute, to protect the groundwater during and after the operation? What are they supposed to do after the operation to protect the groundwater from further infiltration of that substance they put in the ground, for example? But are there specific guidelines or requirements?
Not that I'm aware of. Seth or Kevin, are you guys aware of anything at the groundwater quality rule level?
Where I'm coming from, I appreciate why language being there, but I also tend to disfavor language in statutes that aren't clear or specific enough, or that can't be enforced. And that's kind of where we're going with this, way that kind of, that's kind of what it is.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Don Beck, does not wish to speak, undecided, has that changed?
He walked.
He left. Oh, okay. Casey Klosterman, may wish to speak, opposed?
Thank you, I'm Casey Coleman with CRH, and honestly, many of the fish you showed in Spokane are owned by our companies. We've got 5 decades of experience in this industry, 4 decades specifically in sand and gravel, and 2 decades specifically with this company. And in that time, there is no evidence of us spilling any contaminant into any sand and gravel operation anywhere in North America. We're a worldwide company. I can't tell you what's happened in Europe. I don't want to do that. But I do specifically cover all of these areas in Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and California. I have compassion with what you're working on, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness in this process. I've done what you've done. I've sat on planning commissions. I've been appointed by governors. I've been appointed by the Bureau of Land Management to look into safe practices. I've worked across various states on many, many issues, and still am to this day. it's an important issue that you're looking at. When you looked at some of the sites in Kootenai County that have buffers, often the operator may have proposed those buffers themselves. We do those studies before we start that work, before we make an application. Do we have risk to contaminate the groundwater? We're very aware of that. Will we be storing fuel down by the pit? Of course not. It will be up by the shop at a higher elevation. Will we be fueling down at the pit? Well, of course not. It's mobile equipment. Can you come up there? Where we're mining in the Sullivan pit, is there risk there? Well, there's far less risk today with what we're doing than there was in the past. Use a floating dredge that's electrified, that operates its hydraulics with vegetable oil. We don't expose the aquifer to the risk of petroleum products. I think that what you're looking at is important. I think that the prioritization of water first is important. But let's not forget that the second most ubiquitous material used in the world is concrete. It's a part of all of our lives. We can't have our lives without that, and the most important ingredient in concrete is sand and gravel. And who pays for that mostly? It's mostly all of us through our taxes. The biggest user is the public segment. It's DOTs, it's cities and counties, it's water treatment plants, and so forth. It's important, and the advice that I often give to governmental bodies is be careful of the policies that you make, lest they not have a greater impact on your constituents than the risk that you're trying to mitigate. I'm not saying don't mitigate the risk. It's important that you look at it. Be thoughtful. You guys are asking really good questions. 50-foot buffer. I've been permitting sand and gravel for over 50 years. And that's not just an issue in your area here, it's often discussed. And for whatever reason, there's never been super great science. It does vary from material to material, that filtration impact and how much distance. I've seen reports that say filters in sand and gravel can work within 3 or 4 feet. I've seen reports that say it takes 40 to 50 feet. I'm not here to answer that scientifically for you. I think you're working within a threshold that's reasonable. But in that balance, be aware that you're setting policy that are going to impact the cost of their constituents' lives. If we have to travel further for sand and gravel operations because we depleted that resource early, because you limited the amount of material you could use, you could be raising the cost of those products anywhere from a few pennies per ton, depending on how far, to many dollars per ton of product. And to give you an idea, a state like Idaho probably uses 30 million tons of product a year. If you've added $1, you've added $30 million, if this was true across the state. There is good law. I did help write law in Oregon and in Washington. There is good law for you to go reference. There's good law in California to reference. Some people think that sometimes the regulations in California are too rigorous. I find them reasonable to interpret. We have success permitting in California. But don't make it so difficult here that you raise the cost of business so much that you drive folks further out from the close-in operations because your overall environmental impact may be greater. We pride ourselves on leading the world in sustainability. You go read about our company. We use third-party auditors to review everything we're doing, to review our reports on, are we timely if we have a 25-gallon spill? Yeah, you're right, they do occur. Thank God they haven't occurred into water, but they do occur. We report them timely, and the most important thing as testified is how quick do you clean them up? Do you respond to
Thank
the
you,
response?
you're past time.
Okay, thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Okay, thank you, didn't mean to cut you off, but.
No, you're fine. Appreciate it.
Any questions?
I guess, to summarize the first part of your presentation is, don't forget, you have a self-regulating incentive. You don't want to get sued for dumping that stuff in the aquifer. You're going to try to run your operation in a way that's going to avoid exposing the aquifer. Right? My question is, on the vertical setback, what do you think is a reasonable, how many feet should be set back, I think?
I think you should ask for, I think that what some of the letters coming into you said, that you should ask for a hydrogeological study to be submitted, I think is a reasonable request. get evidence, as our attorney said, get specific evidence for each site as to what's important. As I mentioned, the different types of soils have different impacts.
On the corner here, what would you say is a reasonable setback?
Well, I can tell you the two, and this isn't my answer, I'm willing to give you an answer. The two that were cited at 40 and 50 feet are our sites. One of those we acquired that came with it. I don't know the science that was put into it. The one that we have, we offered that protection. We offered the protection because we know there's a concern. I think that thickness is a reasonable.
10 feet?
50 feet.
50 feet?
Now, does that back the science for, I'm doing that in overabundance of caution, does that back the science for every soil type, whether there's more clay materials in it that might attract those chemicals better? What are the chemicals that are at risk here? Are there other practices and safeguards being put in place, like where fueling can take place, what type of equipment's being used, what's the mining methodology? All of those things are important. I think what you need to listen to is, do you have a good operator submitting good information with their application? And in your determination of those, is that a reasonable protection in the balance for that operation?
Well, I mean, to start getting into the weeds as to the operator and how they're laid out, then you get into micro, regulation. That seems to me, what they're trying to do here is create a baseline, this 50-foot setback. And then my question to you is, if you don't agree with that, what is the proper distance?
Yeah, I can answer that in a more general way of what I see across multiple states. Multiple states are more often using the 10 foot.
10 foot, so you would say 10 feet.
I would say 10 foot in most cases would be reasonable. I would want to know what are the particular risks for that site. I mean, do I need open heart surgery right now, or can I take a medication? I don't know what the answer to that specifically without knowing more about the patient or the issue.
You said you offered the second, that information on your other line, as you offered to put as 45. You said the two mines, you had the two others that were yours. One was,
Both of them are ours now. One of them we committed, the other one was one we acquired with the older one. They both are, and I don't remember which one is 40 or 50 feet, so one of them we submitted the recommendation for.
so the one that you submitted, you went through the process to determine that depth? Is that what you're saying?
We did not determine, I want to be very clear with this, in my recollection, we did not determine the science of what it was, we determined that that's likely what the decision maker would feel most comfortable with.
How did you make that determination?
Based upon that's the trend, is to put that level of protection, especially both in, the aquifer here as well as in the aquifer in Spokane County. The new permits in Spokane County don't allow you to mine into the aquifer.
Give me an idea. You're right, that each site is gonna be fairly site-specific, right? How would your industry feel or your company feel about a requirement that you do an adequate study to determine the proper?
We would absolutely accept it, and that's what I'm recommending that you do. And I think that you also had that recommended from outside sources as well.
So for the vertical setback, we recommend that the industry, the individual company, whatever, be required to do their own study to justify
Geologic study.
what it should be.
Right.
Oh,
Any other questions?
it's interesting, because that might solve a specific requirement.
No, and I do see the conundrum that you're in. Likely, most of you are not experts to make this determination, so you like a source of information that would help you make a qualified decision. That's what you're actually asking for the entire application. Are there sufficient resources? Are the resources of quality such that it can make these products usable, so that we can trade the balance off of this maybe farmland for this extraction of this other natural resource? And are we adequately protecting this important resource for water? Have you provided evidence to do that? What I would caution you on is retroactive action, because then you're starting to impinge, especially here in Idaho, where this state specifically believes in protecting property rights. We're starting to impinge upon those investments that were made prior with respect to that. If there is no evidence of contamination, then I would think that would be an extreme decision to be made to retroactively apply it. Again, we don't have any in our county that would apply in groundwater. It won't affect us. I don't know if there are some. I would just caution.
Well, I mean, protecting property rights cuts both ways. I mean, often that term is used to protect individual property rights, but, you know, the society has a property right in good water. And if something poisons the water, then you're affecting a lot of people's property rights. And not only the right to drink water, but the property literally, if it's contaminated, they can't sell the land. So, I mean, it cuts both ways, and as to retroactivity, if there isn't a company that's engaging in behavior that's dangerous and perilous for the water source, I don't see a problem with retroactive application, frankly, because, you know, we need to protect the water source. I'm not saying that's happening here, that, you know, but I'm intrigued by the idea of putting the onus on the company to create their own analysis that's acceptable, some not acceptable to the county as to the proper depth.
I'm gonna, break in here and ask for a 3-minute break, 3-minute potty break. We've had some interest in that.
I am joining you, thank you for the time, and I would say that as you look at the risks specific to this industry, this is typically not the industry that has a history of groundwater contamination, and I know that you all know that.
I just have one more question for you, sir.
Well, can we wait until
Well,
we have a chance and then
just take a second.
we can resume?
What we've talked about in our groups and stuff, at workshops and stuff, is who is responsible for the expense of determining, you know, the analysis is how far you're supposed to go, and I think many of us are of the opinion, well, it ought to be the person that's asking for the permit, not the county, and have to go out and do it or something, is that what you're proposing?
I do support that.
Get an operator with it.
The burden on the
Okay,
applicant.
all right, thank you.
Thank you all, and I appreciate the slide break.
I would have given you 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, 5 minutes, everybody, 5 minutes. Okay. Is everybody back?
Good call. Thank you. All right, so next will be Trevor Baker, may wish to speak, opposed.
I'll speak for a minute or two. So, my name's Trevor Baker, I'm the general manager for Interstate Concrete and Asphalt Construction for Texas Development Corp. CRH. I just wanted to speak briefly about the regulatory things that we do as a company. We live to a higher standard than just what the government, the mining industry regulates us to. I was texting the crusher operators there as we're in the meeting asking them questions. And our hydraulic tanks on the crusher, I'm up already?
No, that wasn't.
Hey, that was quick. We regulate those, we inspect those tanks daily and report those monthly by our company standards. Everything is that way on our sites. All equipment is washed up at the shops, everything is fueled up at the shops. If there's a spill, it is reported immediately. If it's not reported immediately and someone finds out, someone's terminated over it. We live to this higher standard and we hold ourselves to the higher standard. We have, like Casey eloquently said, we have no problem with kind of your thought process on it. The depth of it is, dependent on the ground, all for the cost of the study on our side. We do the right thing. The Sullivan Pit, that is the only active one currently. I think the state one was a couple of them were still active. That is the only active site there still in Spokane. That dredge out there runs on food grade vegetable oil on the water. It's electrified, and it replaced 8 pieces of diesel equipment at that site. It's all on to do that. Also with that, that's not can't do that. That's a grandfathered in site. The new permitting, you're not gonna be allowed or touch it or let the water bleed through at all. So therefore, our stance is pretty neutral. So just kind of wanted to point a couple things out. Our standards as a company.
Do you know of any other company who does not employ your same standards?
I cannot speak to that.
And you said you would be in favor of doing a study for your site?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For any new permitting, I think a study of that threshold between the surface water. Absolutely. We're already doing it. We're already doing it in sites. That's just part of our due diligence to make sure we're doing the right thing. We're a large company. We have to. The liability's higher for us.
Any questions?
So you two wouldn't have any problem with a rule that would require you to do a study that meets the standards of whoever it is when you have regulated, before you to get your permit?
Where would you fall as far as pre-existing operation, as far as studies go, or grandfather?
I believe that the shallowest one is the acquisition site, correct?
I don't think that's what he's asking. He's
Evaluating-
asking retroactively.
Oh, retroactively? Yeah, I don't think it's retroactive. On it, I think all our sites are permitted within acceptable levels.
If you had a minimum that you would absolutely agree with, what would that minimum buffer be?
Ma'am, I do not have the wherewithal to speak to that. That is not my cup of tea.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Next up is Todd Kaufman, may wish to speak, opposed. Todd, I don't pronounce your names right, I apologize.
Okay, so I just have some questions, I guess. There hasn't been a known problem, right? And so we're creating new laws, new regulations for something that's already regulated, and to change what is already existing. And we have one of our pits is 50 feet. That's what we agreed to when we did it at the time with the commissioners. When we did a development agreement on that pit, it's not a conditional use permit, it's zone mining with a development agreement, so we can put some teeth into it, it's 50 feet. So it's not an argument. But the other one's 30 feet. And so that 30 feet, that's, I don't know, 2 million tons plus for that 20-foot difference. It's only a 50-acre site. But you don't do, like what you guys are trying to regulate, you don't, Panhandle Health is out there every year. DEQ's involved, they're out at our pits all the time. So to put something more in there in the county to come up with a new regulation, it just doesn't make sense to me of where it came from. You know, we're using examples of stuff in Washington, you know, where they've been actively still mining in dog work. They didn't stop because they thought there was gonna be a problem. They didn't stop because, you know, oh, there was a spill or something in the pit. I mean, the quantities that we talked about with hydrologists, I mean, like, you would never have that stuff down in the bottom of the pit, at the closest part to your, everything's done up on top. I mean, I think the guys that are writing this stuff up probably didn't spend any time going around and looking at the sites. And they are in your reclamation plans with the Department of Land, it does show how deep they are. That's why I know that the R1 is 30 feet, and then with the development agreement, if the county put 50, and our reclamation plan also goes 50 foot within the aquifer. So I mean, I don't know if we're creating more and we're trying to retro add it to existing stuff, and if you guys wanna put it to going forward, that's fine, or if there was a site that you had a problem, but then Panhandle Health and DEQ would already be dealing with it, not the commissioners. You know, for the commissioners or a planning commission to take off, I mean, you're bringing up examples, ma'am, that there hasn't been a problem yet. You're just thinking that there's gonna be a problem, and the attorney for CRH brought it up, and she's right. We're just chasing ourselves around, like, well, what ifs? I mean, what if I wouldn't drive anymore?
Do you have a problem with a rule that would say that to get permitted, you would do a study to determine the proper?
Who's hiring the study, me or you? It's gonna be different. Who's gonna hire the study? And who's gonna,
My
whoever
question is, do you have
hires
a
them
problem with it?
on a new piece of property? No, if I was trying to rezone a new piece of property, but the thing is that it's all subject to who hires them. If the county hires them, they're gonna say it one way. If I hire him or the developer hires him, it's gonna be different.
I don't share that skepticism.
Okay.
If people are genuine, they're gonna do a scientific study, and they're gonna determine what's the proper vertical setback based upon certain, you know, evidence-based criteria, and then you have someone over here who would determine whether it meets muster or not. I frankly don't share that. If we're that cynical, then nothing's gonna work. We can never do a study.
Well, it's just going, I mean, yeah, going forward, if I was trying to rezone a piece of land and change it to mining or do a conditional use and or development agreement for mining, then it would be fine. But I just, listening to the hydrologist talk about it, he didn't really have any real, it could be 30 feet, it could be 50 feet. I mean, there was nothing that said, oh yeah, I mean, we've tracked it and the model and look, it's the rainy season, and nobody's going about crushing in the bottom of a pit in the middle of the rainy season. You know, this is dry weather stuff, and nobody's gonna ignore a spill for, you know, weeks on end, like we talked about. Look, we didn't get it cleaned up in 5 days, and how you really managed to tell that 700 gallons didn't get cleaned back up and soaked in, I'm like, I've heard from following the modeling, how you really can tell what, you know, it's a big number of what it would change in our one pit, and the other one, like I said, it doesn't matter. And going forward, I would say if you were bringing a new piece of property to change it to zone mining, it would, you know, 50 foot's the new standard. I wouldn't see it. Nobody's going to the aquifer. I've never seen one of them in Kootenai County that's been anywhere close to the aquifer. Most of the pits probably aren't even at, you know, the 40 or 50 foot depth anyway. I don't think, I mean, name what ones are mined out in the county that you're talking about in Idaho. There's what we're talking about is something that's so far in the future, we don't even know that it could happen. We haven't had a spill, we don't put that kind of stuff in the bottom of the pit. It's such a, you're in and out and you're running, or there's secondary confinement, you know, if you had a fuel tank that's up on top of the pit, it would never spill out. Like I said, I would encourage people to go look around at the sites before we start making regulations that just change them. Like, oh, we're all gonna go retro and we're all going 50-foot, you know, when.
Yeah, I have a question. If you don't have any kind of an analysis either on a existing operation or future operation as to where the aquifer is, you know.
Sure.
My concern is still as a purveyor of drinking water is if we intercept the aquifer and make it subject to surface water, surface contamination. So it would appear, it seemed to me that at the very least we'd have to do some kind of an analysis to know that we don't actually intercept the thing and make a lake in the bottom of your operation. So we would have, it seems like we need to see some kind of a process to say how deep it is to the, drill a pilot well or something, so you know that you're not gonna get so close that you're gonna actually intercept the water itself.
Well, I guess that every well, I mean, if there's much of a concrete there, they all have wells. I bet you every pit you're talking about, that's gravel source, has a well.
At least we got some
All ours do.
data.
Yeah, that's why we know what the water depth is, because we have wells in there. You know, and you may not ever get down to that, but if we do at that one site, I mean, it's worth a buck a ton. We're talking about $2 million swing for you guys to say, oh, we just think it should go 50 feet. That's on that one site, just, how many other people are affected the same way? I'm not Old Castle where I have thousands of acres local. Not a big. You guys have more land. I mean, if you gave up 20 feet and said we're all 50 foot, but they're still gonna keep going over Washington into the aquifer. So whatever we're doing in Kootenai County isn't changing because Washington doesn't care. They keep going to aquifer, right? So what we're gonna regulate and spend more money, cost Kootenai County more money, because it's gonna cost more eventually. This pit's can't go any deeper because we're 50 foot. It's gonna make a difference someday, but Washington doesn't care to stop them, so why? Get back.
Thank you.
Sure.
Pat, I have a question.
For Todd, or?
Yeah, Pat, so this deck is gonna take away the right to mine that gravel, right?
Right, yeah.
Does that fall in the area of takings, or is that not an issue?
I think as long as it's, there's a rational nexus between, the regulation and what it's intended to protect, then I don't think there would be a regulatory taking. And of course, the greater the depth, the more, the greater the risk of the potential taking.
So it could become an issue?
Yeah, if it's too.
I mean, if it's related, rationally related to protecting the water, and you could
Like
substantiate that.
Yeah, like Justice Holmes famously said, if it goes too far, there could be at least an argument for regulatory taking.
Next is Craig Cosin?
Craig Cosin.
Thank you. May wish to speak and oppose.
Craig Kozak, 3110 Government Way, Kootenai, Idaho. CA paving, picnics. Just wanted to come up and speak about the distance to the aquifer. I believe that 30 foot is what's been around here for main pits, and I believe that is a safe depth. I don't believe playing in the aquifer with no protection. I do believe in some protection. My home is within a mile of our pit, and I drink out of that same aquifer, and I love the water. I believe in protecting it. There definitely could be some other monitoring versus just capping it in a distance. Maybe you want to make up regulations on fuel sources in the pit and stuff like that, like everybody testified to, that they do it outside the pit, but I'm sure there's people that fuel up equipment down in the hole, you know? But I mean, the hole within the buffer limit, I would say. There's other avenues to go down to protect your aquifer than the 30-foot limit, because if it's 20, 30, or 40, or 50, and you spill, 10,000 gallons of fuel, what's really gonna be enough? And if we do have a fuel spill, all the heavy equipment is there to dig it up immediately, right? So, say you have a 1,000-gallon spill, you could dig it up within minutes after it happened. You don't need no permits, you don't need to go find equipment and truck it in, it's all there to remediate the spill immediately. So, with that being said, I'm here if you have any questions for me.
So you just said that, you have the equipment to remediate the spills. Are you, speaking to the ones that are below the reportable levels? Or are you speaking to the ones that
I'm
are
thinking
still?
of any spill, 25 gallons, 400 gallons, if you had a spill of any sort, you're gonna dig it up with an excavator or loader, and I'm saying the equipment to do that is the equipment that will most likely be the equipment that had the spill, right? That's the equipment that can clean it up, and it's in the pit already.
And what is the requirement after you report a spill? DEQ, IDL, they are the ones that come out and remediate that, or you are responsible for remediating?
I'm saying if there was a
Yes.
spill, and if I did spill something, I would report it if it was over 25 gallons, and I would clean it up and haul to the proper facility.
And would that follow in with the due process, like meet requirements for everybody else if they clean it up? So DEQ would not have to respond, or Panhandle Health would not have to respond within that timeframe?
I just
That's
say
all.
the normal process for the
Come up
board.
here, Seth. I'm just trying to figure out the process, because if that's happening, and it's not being reported because it's being cleaned up, or if it does potentially happen and they can clean it up, how does that then interact then with the regulatory agencies?
I would just say the gentleman's response is probably the best case scenario. Being able to have equipment on site, a good example is that BNSF has some of the largest kind of response, that's the real line that is. And if they're well within the rights to be able to clean up and mitigate something, that makes our job a lot easier. To be clear, DEQ, we don't have like a response team that goes out ourselves to clean things up. We have contractors that do that. So usually, some states do have teams, but DEQ is not one of those agencies where we have DEQ badged response people that come and clean stuff up.
So it's completely fine for them to be able to, I'm just making sure that's fine and that's not an issue.
Yeah, that would be, again, we would basically say, hey, many times companies, when they have an environmental, when we send them a 45-day letter, which is say, you've committed a violation, they have to hire an environmental consultant, to assess, they're the experts in cleaning up environmental, contamination, and so, I don't know, the local one, they would kind of confer with, the local company A that does environmental, cleanup, and they would say, our client contained this within their dump truck, whether it would be their 10 or 15 ton dump truck, and it was all cleaned up within the hour. And then we did and basically what would happen is, the consultant would probably make his company leave the pit open so that they could do confirmation sampling. That's generally, given this specific scenario we just posed, we'd ask them to have a third party that doesn't have a conflict of interest come in and then do sidewall sampling of that location. So they would say, don't backfill it in with clean fill, leave it open. Or if you they might not know better, say, okay, we have to excavate this location. And so we would have to do confirmation sampling of that. That's how that scenario would play out. We'd say, just show us that it's completely cleaned up. And given that scenario, if they had like a 400-gallon spill, and the excavator came in, put that in a 20-ton truck, they'd probably clean it up.
It's just a new piece of information, so I thought it was very helpful to know that is a possibility that can happen right then and there.
Where they taking it to?
That depends on, again, circle, we're gonna keep saying this. If thick soil is, basically there's Graham Road in Spokane that accepts, contamination, but if it's above a certain threshold, Graham Road might say, no, you have to bring it to, US
Nowhere in
Ecology.
Kootenai County.
Is there regular ways to it's too high.
This is a threshold, if it's very high.
Parts per million of contamination determine whether or not
Yeah.
it goes to the drain or.
It would depend on the lab results from the third party who sampled the soil and say, this is what the characterization is, and you have to bring it to facility A or facility B, depending on how.
You know, I think what he's emphasizing is the fact that, you know, these guys are gonna try to do the right thing, get this stuff done.
No, I know
Proper
that.
something, you know, so it isn't just sitting there. The problem is that all the verification of what they've done is, like he says, they have the hole open where they spilled and they dug it out, and they've got to be sampled and make sure that what they did was the right thing to do and all that. That once you set something like this in motion, I mean, I can't defend some of the stuff that's required by the law, because it doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes, but it's just, it sets these things in motion that we have to deal with, because it's basically the federal law, so, and like he said, he'd have to bring somebody out there to sample and make sure that he did the right thing, and all say that's the.
And so during that,
Yeah.
this is obviously theoretical, but during that timeframe, then you are no longer able to mine from that location. Would that be correct? Or would you
Until the
still-
monitoring is completely successful, it's showing that you've removed the contaminant completely, then you can go back to my current section. But let's say that section is in that 30-foot buffer or 50-foot buffer, that's what I'm talking about. It's above it, you're still gonna clean it up.
What agency determines whether your cleanup is compliant?
DEQ.
Which is,
I think the Department of Environmental Quality, yeah, we're basically the primacy for EPA rule. in the state of Idaho.
well,
Apart from a couple minor things, I didn't notice.
Idaho Department of Environmental Quality.
Yeah, most federal environmental regulations are promulgated to.
What do you think of the idea that the company would do their own vertical setback study and submit it to you for approval?
A lot of times, I will say, this is the way most things go. I'll use a different industry or a different scenario, just so you can get the idea. With wastewater, I was just talking with my colleague Kevin, recycled water reuse scenario where you have kind of a public utility where they take in wastewater effluent, and they have to find a site where they use recycled water. So instead of going through a wastewater treatment plant like the city of Kootenai and Post Falls have, which is like a proper, a class, I forget it's class B or class C, don't quote me on this. But there are facilities that can discharge that water into the Spokane River. That costs a lot of money, and so lots of places that are smaller scale, like Spirit Lake, Harps, for instance, is Canadian Regional Sewer Board, they have recycled water, which they take that effluent, they treat it to a standard where they can irrigate sacrificial crops, right? We have them hire third-party engineers to do that work, to verify how much, what crop they can use, what's the nutrients that's appropriate, that this crop needs, how much phosphorus and nitrate are in their effluent stream, how, what months they can irrigate, et cetera. They have to hire a third-party engineer to do that, and then they submit that to us, and we have our engineers who are experts in that review and say, okay, this third-party engineer did it, passed with muster, we buy into what their analysis is. And a lot of times that involves us going on site and ground truthing their work. A lot of times I'm not in the engineering group, but our engineers do that, for instance. But in remediation sites, the most common one is a gas station site that's old, that's leaking. We have underground tanks that leak. And so when a consultant goes on site to assess that, me, Kevin, or someone in our group's on site watching the third-party consultant do it. Again, not that we don't trust them, but they're hired by the client, so we just kind of make sure they're not being too much of an advocate for the client. Okay, they're doing it objectively on behalf of their client, right? And so we just sort of so there's lots of groundwater sites that we go to quarterly to make sure that they're not sampling from the pond rather than this well, right? Not obviously there's licenses and stuff to keep checking that. That's sort of how the process goes with environmental work and DEQ.
So you're telling me you'd be okay with a provision that require them to do a vertical setback study for your agency to approve?
I'm sort of My personal opinion on it is very neutral on it. Again, that is a common process, like,
Okay, so I'm asking you,
Yeah.
would you be okay with it?
I'd be okay with, yeah, again, I'd be okay with that, just, and what would happen then, if that review would be sent to me or whatever appropriate person is to review that. And say, yeah, this is the rationale from this consultant, this rationale is sound, that again, they were, acting in good faith.
It seems to me in a study like that, an individual operator who is holding themselves to a very high standard in
Yeah.
terms of secondary containment, things like that, they might require less of a vertical setback, and they can mine more gravel with more money.
Right.
Someone who's sloppy, you're not doing it right and everything, and they give you a study, you might say, no, you need more buffer. There's a lot more factors that can be considered than just the blanket rule, 50 feet for everything.
That applies for, and again, that's the, like I said, for engineering and recycled water, that varies. Again, some sites can apply more effluent because it's more appropriate given the data.
But you see the logic in
Yeah.
making it more site specific?
Like I said, I don't wanna get, again, it's kind of outside my expertise of, should that be this is where being a scientist and being a regulator kind of mesh, and again, I'm not a planning and zoning expert, so.
But you see the logic in that?
I see the logic.
I have a point to make about that.
Talk about it, Terry.
Huh?
Talk about it.
Yeah, I have a point to make about that. He's an expert, okay. Do we have any people like him on staff in the county that's gonna issue the permit? You see what I'm saying? To determine whether or not the work that the person that wants to have the permit has done or has hired done by a third-party engineer or whatever. Is there somebody available in the government process to evaluate how well a job that individual did to make sure that what the proposal is a good one? You see what I'm saying? I mean,
Well, you need
and I
the
think
person-
I've run into this stuff.
But you have that all the time.
I mean, with water, with like wells and stuff, this person has got a well, and a new developer wants to drill a well here, and this well was allowed, and this guy's well was dry, because the person that this person hired didn't do an adequate job of determining what was gonna happen to the neighbor's well. It's happening around Kootenai County right now, so this is the same kind of thing. It's just, I'm an engineer, I'm a licensed engineer, and I wanna say we're all ethical, we do a really good job of everything we do, but I mean, there still needs to be a little bit of a process where the government has some way of determining whether or not the professional that's providing information for their client.
You would need that.
A good job.
You would need that, but you do that with building permits, I said, submit plans, and the building permit, people look at it, and they say, well, you need, 6 by 6 studs here, not 2 by 4, but, you can have that person.
Ben, did you want?
Yeah, I suppose I could address that question, or the answer to your question, Commissioner Harwood. No, we don't have somebody on staff with the credentials that Mr. Oliver has. What we would probably do, though, is enter into some kind of agency comment period where we would defer to the experts, and then they would have an opportunity to respond.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, you could-
Mr. Cosette should be allowed to provide a response.
It's radical, going down much radical. So I just believe that some sort of buffer is fine. I think 30 foot's adequate, but, if you dig a test hole or whatever, use some cores at the surface, the soil down there could be dense and tight with tight clays, and it could be a totally different soil at 30 feet than 50 feet, or, versus 20 feet from the surface. So
And that's why it's a site specific.
it should be a case by case, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jana, or Jana, thank you, McDonald. May wish to speak opposed.
Good afternoon. I am with my colleagues from Seacom Development, Interstate Concrete. Oh, sorry, I'll talk louder. I don't normally have that problem, so. I appreciate appreciate the conversation around the depth. I do want to pivot just a little bit because we had some other comments that we addressed, some other issues with the ordinance as it was proposed that I just wanted to touch on really quick. One of them was the setbacks in the ordinance, 1,000 feet from any parcel within the agricultural, rural, agricultural, suburban, restricted residential and high density. I don't know if you guys have seen from the maps, but agriculture is already next to many of our sites. We are compatible use with agriculture, and we reclaim a lot of our agricultural or a lot of our sites back to agriculture. We have a site right now where we mined, we put the topsoil back, and the farmer is refarming. So I would like you guys to reconsider that 1,000-foot setback from, I think we struck out everything, before the restricted residential. So that's the first comment I had. The second comment I have in section 2 of 8.5.125 on D, the sentence was added, the quantity of excavated material may be limited as necessary to protect adjoining lands and natural resources. We are exactly a natural resource, and we should be protected as well. And so in regards to also the setbacks, I think protections to the resource, the more that we can mine at a site, the less sites open. And I know that argument was discussed already on the depth, but you know, when counties allow residential, high-density residential to impede on us, that impacts our operations too. So just kind of looking at that from a common sense approach for protection standards. The last thing I did want to talk about in regards to the depth, as far as I know, and the people that are here with me today, none of us have been contacted or asked any questions about our operations, either in Idaho or in Washington. We are an open book. We are happy to have those conversations, and we are happy to host any and all of you for site visits upon request. So I just wanted to share that.
How many operations do you have in Idaho?
That was a good question. I want to say we have 6 sites in Kootenai County.
6 in, yes, southern.
6 in Kootenai County.
And all of those back up to varied different zonings, or are they all the agriculture that you mentioned, or was that?
No, they're different zonings.
Here in Kootenai County?
Yes. Yes.
So most of your stuff is then in Washington that you were referring to?
No, I mean, it's a mixed bag in Kootenai County as to who our neighbors are.
So you propose, I understand right, striking out the 1,000, everything up to restricted residential.
Yes.
So we would take out any parcel of agricultural, rural, agricultural, suburban.
Yes. And that was in our comment letter.
Totally taking it out or replacing it with a lower number?
I would say taking it out. We are, like I said, we're compatible use with line next to agriculture. We have, we're an interim use of the land, so we leave in mind agricultural, and, we work in conjunction with our neighbor farmers. So I would propose a lower number, personally.
Maybe a brief comment if I may. So the language that you're referring to is not a proposed language, that's existing code. So anything that's in the strikeout or underline is what is being proposed. So that's just current code, what you're reading right there. But there is a difference between that section and the section with regards to section 2, the restricted surface mining operations. The first section is in reference to mining zone standards, so it's only applicable to parcels that are zoned mining. The standards with regards to section 2, 85125, are conditional use permit standards. And those may be done in the zones like agricultural or rural, industrial, as it says here. And so those same setbacks don't apply to conditional use permit approvals for restricted surface mines. They would only be applicable to those that are zone mining. So I wanted to make a little bit of distinction.
The setbacks are applicable to those who zone in the mining.
That's correct. Not something that's been approved through a conditional use permit.
Okay, so which area is zoned for mining, I guess, on the prairie? Is there a lot?
Let's see. I'm sorry, could you rephrase your question?
So these setback requirements apply to open pits within mining zones, right? So where are the mining zones?
Here's the zoning map that you can see up on the screen. I'm just going to focus in on the areas where they're more highly concentrated. There may be some outside of this, but this is where they're most prevalent. The purple is essentially and those that are zone mining. So you can see this area here, this diagonal hash is a development agreement, but with a mining zone. And same here and over here as well.
So we're talking about very few areas.
So there's zone
That are zone mining, yeah.
Yeah, zone mining, but that would have to set that, I'd have to set that requirement, right?
And what's the green zoning?
So there's two different greens. The darker green is agricultural and the lighter green is agricultural suburban.
What's the logic of having setbacks in the mining zone regions and not in the agricultural region, exactly?
Well, a conditional use permit does go before the Board of County Commissioners for review. And so what they do is there's different required findings that the Board of County Commissioners will make, and they'll take into consideration the impact on the surrounding area and can implement some setbacks should it be necessary.
Thank you. Next is Lewis Beck.
I yield my time to Ms. Kelsey.
Okay, thank you. Who's opposed? And then next is Brody Kaufman, does not wish to speak. Opposed, is that still the case, still not wish to speak? He left, okay. And last is Robert Moore, may wish to speak. Opposed.
Yes.
Thank you.
My name is Robert Moore. I'm a manager at Coeur Paving. I don't have much to add to what the CRH folks already mentioned, but a few things came to mind. We talked about the impact of how much that would restrict the minerals that we could extract from the ground if we were to impose a greater setback. You'll deplete your existing gravel pits more quickly. As one of the gentlemen mentioned, the use of concrete, gravel is pretty critical to not only DOT projects, but all manner of infrastructure and building. So what that's gonna mean is those pits will be depleted more quickly and you'll be mining at more remote sites. So which is gonna result in great, not only financial impact, but potentially an environmental impact. The one scenario that the gentleman from DAQ mentioned about the fuel spill in Spirit Lake was just that. It was something not in a mine, it was over the road. So, I mean, stands to reason that there may be greater risk by mining at sites that are further removed from actual point of delivery production. Also, it seems that compliance with environmental regulation is already enforced by Panhandle Health District. It was mentioned that there's maybe a gap that we need to close in regulation. It seems to me that it's not so much a gap, but an understanding that impacts of small spills are negligible, maybe not even measurable. You mentioned, you're putting fuel in your tank and you have a little spillage. It seems like they're providing for circumstances like that, which happen in non-industrial settings, non-mining settings. As far as the question about the analysis, doing an analysis, it would seem doesn't seem that it would be that cut and dried. It seemed like you would need to determine, as you said, site-specific, or the realistic exposure of that mine site to contaminants, how much, what kind of concentration, and then furthermore, needed to establish limits as to what's reasonable, how adverse would the effects be of said contaminants to groundwater. Yeah, I would think those would be two factors you'd really have to account for.
So you would be in favor of some sort of study done by the company that would be approved?
Again, I'm neutral on it, because just to hire a study, I mean, what are you looking to accomplish? You need to determine again, what is it exposed to, what kind of contaminants are we talking about, site specific, and then what are those effects? Because as you said, there's allowances for a certain amount of exposure to contaminants. You're at the gas station and you get a little spillage when you're fueling. Well, no one's sending up the red flags with it. So what's reasonable needs to be determined too. I don't know if that would be defined by the agency or would that be defined in the study. And I mean, lastly, like, no one has yet pointed to any imminent threat or history of threat to public health resulting from a negligence on the part of an operator. So the question arises, what need is there? Is there a need, or is existing regulation adequate to protect the aquifer?
Well, I think what we heard at the outset is there's a need, right? You determined through your studies that there is a need, even though we haven't had a spill yet in a ground. That's a threshold question. We don't need any of those.
Well, I mean, like everybody before me, I would agree that protection is necessary, but I would say the fact that there's not been a history of impacts, of negative impacts, is a testament that existing regulation may be adequate.
Yeah, it should be factored in. I think that's reasonable to argue that.
I think we need to be careful about making comparisons between a spill along the highway someplace and a spill on top of the aquifer. I think that's the difference. It's a different situation. I think there's spills everywhere, but this marathon thing where we get our drinking water is a special place. That's all I'm saying. You know, I mean, it's a, I don't go over trucks now. I just did like mine and down by the fall, you know, had to clean them up, went right to South Fork and Salmon River, you know, but I mean, it's different. People are drinking that water, you know, that's the difference.
I heartily agree. There are different scenarios. That's kind of my point, actually. The exposure to public health issues is less in those scenarios with a tanker or whatever above the road. And at the same time, in the mine area, you don't have those tankers. So that's why it needs to be site specific. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, is there anybody on the phone?
You'd hear them if there are.
Let me just remember, let me just see if there's any. Is anybody on the phone? No comments.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Okay, do we have any other questions for the members in the audience that we want to address before I close the public comment section? Any other questions? I actually did have one for Seth. Can you come back up, please? Mr. Oliver. So when you mentioned the spill and the cleanup, that you could only go down to, what'd you say, 20 feet?
Yes, yes.
But you left 700 gallons?
Mm-hmm.
What would it have taken, do you think, to what depth would it have taken to completely remediate that? Knowing what the source was, the strata, all of that? Is there any way to theorize that?
Again, this was sort of, you know, without a soil sample at every, you can't get all the data, right? But, our calculation was it was moving at 10 feet per day, and that's like vertically, which is pretty fast for normal situations. We have finds, again, Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer, I don't know, preach to the choir here, but Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer is very unique globally. It has some of the fastest it's the most transmissive aquifer measured in the natural environment, and that's the USGS's words, not mine. Basically, it means groundwater as a general statement moves very slow. 1 foot per day groundwater is fast groundwater for most places in the country, for most places in the world. But in the prairie, we have like 60 feet per day groundwater travel velocities, and then, so generally vertical seepage or vertical infiltration is very slow. But given that the material is already quite transmissive, it moves 10 feet per day in this particular scenario, given, that was given that it didn't rain. So, given it was, October and a rainy day, that 10-foot infiltration would have been, much larger. I don't want to make up a number, but basically, whether something's saturated or unsaturated varies. It's basically its permeability by a factor of 7 orders of magnitude, which is quite a lot. You can have the same material that's completely dry and the same material that's completely saturated, and the ability for it to transmit contaminants and water varies by 7 orders of magnitude. So it could be 7 feet per day, or it could be 7 million feet, or that's a bad analogy, but it could be, a permeability of 7, I'll just say the number, or it could be a permeability of 7 million. Just not giving units, just to illustrate how much, just whether it's saturated or unsaturated changes it. And so, at that given that it was 10 feet per day, and it was in a dry scenario, being dry soil, that's really fast. 10 feet per day infiltration, dry soil, vertically, is not normal. And so, basically we had 2,000 gallons of diesel on the ground, and when they came to take photos, like 2 hours later, there was no recoverable diesel on the surface. So it just went droop down the drink, and that's that. So there was no vacuuming, there was no screeching it just infiltrated. And every other place I worked, that's not the case. There'd be, recoverable product within a dry well, and it wouldn't just be gone. So, my estimation, again, if you were to make me back a napkin guess without data, somewhere over 40 feet, maybe somewhere to 40, 60 feet, given day 2 or day 3. So.
Any other questions? Okay. At this point, no more questions and no more public comments. I will go ahead and close the public comment. I need a motion to do so, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Slater moves to close, then Ms. Bowles seconded, so,
Commissioner Harwood,
Aye.
Commissioner James,
Aye.
Commissioner Summer,
Aye.
Commissioner Slater,
Aye.
Commissioner Bowles,
Aye.
Commissioner Foster,
Aye.
Chair Bateson.
aye. Okay, public comment period is now closed, so I will now open it up for deliberations. And just as a reminder, we're gonna do each one individually. So we're gonna start off with ORA 26-0001, Ordinance 640 for expired building permits. So I will open up deliberations for that one.
Only thing I can say is anything we can help these guys with all their workload, I think is a good thing to do. And I think that this just makes some sense. There's not have all these old permits out there and stuff.
Any questions, concerns on this one? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve ORA 640.
So moved.
In a second.
Also,
Commissioner Harwood,
aye.
Commissioner James,
Aye.
Commissioner Summer,
Aye.
Commissioner Slater,
Aye.
Commissioner Bowles,
Aye.
Commissioner Foster,
Aye.
Chair Bateson.
Aye. Okay, with that, the motion passed. Now, ORA 260002, ordinance ORA 641, surface mining protection measures.
I'd like to make an analogy in that, when we buy insurance, we don't buy insurance because we, are a bad driver ourselves, or we're worried about other drivers. Or there might be an unexpected accident, unanticipated. We don't buy life insurance because we expect to die tomorrow, but we might want to protect our family should something happen. So it's a matter of insurance. The question is, how much insurance? And then, going back to the life insurance example, analogy, is say you have a history of heart disease in your family. You might want to increase that insurance. And with the geological uniqueness of the aquifer, I think that's an important factor to keep in consideration as to how much insurance, i.e. level, we want to impose. Then we also have to remember that, as we discussed in our workshop, that there is an opportunity to request variance. So if we keep that open and reasonable, then a company could come and say, well, I think this is onerous, we'll do research, and then the variance could come to the city or the county and be granted or not granted, depending on what's found.
I actually have a question for Ben or Mike. Do we know how many of these pits this would affect? As in the ones that possibly already might be below that 50-foot threshold? Is there a number?
No, I don't know how many pits may possibly already exceed that threshold. As we've heard in the testimony, some reclamation permits from Idaho Department of Lands address that point, many do not. And so it's possible that we just don't have that data. Without perhaps going to each site individually, we heard that individual sites do monitor their groundwater levels. And so the individual operators may have a good indication as to whether or not they have exceeded that threshold or not. But as far as the data available to the county as of now, no, we do not know.
Okay. So, if I remember what you said earlier, potentially this could make multiple ones non-conforming, right?
It is possible.
And we don't know what that number would be. What would it, and I'm just trying to work through all this. You said that, and they mentioned that many of them are monitoring. We hope that all of them are monitoring, but we don't know that either. So what would the process be if we were, as a county, to try to find that out? Would that be like a letter to every single one to find out, and they would have to report back? What would that process be? What would that look like if we were to take that stance or go down that route?
Well, I mean, we could look at a couple of different options, I suppose. One, we could look at an option of individually, should the planning commission recommend that this be remanded back to staff to acquire more information, then we could reach out to the operators individually, request that information to be provided. We could, if it is going to be remanded back to staff, we could entertain an idea through the form of workshops, engaging with the operators to come up with some kind of permitting option, which it sounds like that was generally supported of, having a permit, in which case, their own analysis will be done as a part of that permitting process, perhaps, some kind of evaluation of their groundwater could be done through that permitting process, but again, that could be done perhaps in the form of a workshop. So those two options are coming to mind at the moment.
I don't know if this fits or not, we'll just throw it out there. Let me address the easy one first. This line that says protection of groundwater during and after operation, as per EPA sole source aquifer and so forth. We could just strike the language during and after operation, and it solves the problem, it seems to me. Because it simply would say protection of groundwater as per those EPA sole source aquifer, Idaho State's natural resource designation. I don't know if the council's still here, but that would do away with this issue of, it's sort of punting it, but it seems to me, from a drafting standpoint, that would solve that problem. And on the 50-foot thing, if you did away with the 50-foot provision there and put in the operator or the company or whatever, must submit a vertical setback study to community development or whoever would be the appropriate one, and then it must be approved by you to be permitted. That would make it more site specific. And I have to say that makes logical sense to me because it does several things. I know it's really changing the structure, but, and I'm open to all the criticism in the world, but it seems to me you get the buy-in from the operator, the company, because they're involved in the process and they're helping to self-regulate. And you always get better compliance when you have that. You have the site-specific analysis that can take into consideration specific things, like maybe you have a higher-end operator, more sophisticated, you're gonna tolerate, a less, they're not gonna be rewarded for for being higher-end and more protective of the environment, because they'll be able to mine more gravel, right, and make more money. So it just seems that kind of structure, if you are open to that, regulation, that being part of the permitting process, it seems to me that would solve a lot of the problems. And it would remove
Just
sort
to
of
add what you're
arbitrary.
saying, I think we have to be careful that we address new proposals and current operations too, because there's current operations in this, so we'd have to figure out your scenario, how we would deal with current operations. I mean, if these guys have dug down within 30 feet already, we don't wanna, mess with that. We've gotta figure out what we'd kinda like to know so they didn't dig any deeper, you see what I'm saying? So,
You could also do a hybrid. You could say 50 feet, but to get a variance from that, you can go through this permitting, this.
well, that's what yours is, that would be it. If we give them the opportunity for a variance that can do good work, but a lot of them are doing good work, then we got a process where they're not just, you can't do it at all, but you're doing a good process, and we're asking the proponent to do the process for us, so we can give them a variance. Because there's gotta be some of them that are already below 50 feet, I'll bet.
We already heard testimony that there's at least one.
Yeah,
So, Commissioner James, you're proposing, instead of this draft?
Yeah, so, I think first we have to get on the concept, do we wanna change it to 50 feet, you can get a variance, right? Is one way to do it. Or, you've gotta go to the permitting process, some language like I just read, that seems to me, and what, I guess, at this stage, if I'm understanding where we're at, is, you guys drafted this, right? What I would propose is they come back with another draft that incorporates both of those as alternatives, so we can choose which one we like. And a draft that strikes that language about, during and after. So what I would move is that we have community development, the staff redraft the statute with two alternative provisions, one that provides the 50-foot vertical depth with a variance option, and another that just provides for a permitting option. I can propose some language. And that removes the during and after operation language, because that would remove the concern about that language.
Ben, would you have issue with that, removing that, because you have a reason for it being there?
You know, I think it is, this is of course the decision of the commission, but if from what I'm hearing, both from the public's comments and from the comments and questions that the commission is having, it may make sense to entertain those ideas in the form of a workshop rather than proposing another draft of some of those ideas, so that we can, I think, effectively engage with the Coeur d'Alene tribe, since we have not had the opportunity to, City of Post Falls. We have not had the opportunity to do that just because the comments were received so recently. But not only them, but some of the operators as well. And so I think on behalf of staff, I think that seems to be a recommendation that the planning commission should consider. But again, this is your opportunity to make that.
Ben, you were always persuasive. I amend my motion.
You didn't make it, and it wasn't seconded yet, so you're
One
good.
other thing on there, I like what he's saying, but the only other thing on there is, we've only got one aquifer, and I'd like to err on the side of caution, and I'd like to put a minimum of like 20 feet, at least 20 feet, just as an absolute minimum, even with the study. That's just me, because we've only got one aquifer, and I wanna protect it as much as possible.
So are you suggesting that we support a 20-foot minimum today? And
No,
then do a
no,
workshop?
no,
Or just go
I
to-
want the study, but with a base 20-foot minimum.
Okay, so that's what we would work out through then in a workshop.
So
Yeah,
you're saying
okay,
like,
yeah,
okay,
like 50 feet, but if there's
Instead
a
of-
variance, the variance would be
Yes.
A bare minimum.
capped at 20. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we may be more in favor of Manager Tarbutton's idea of remanding this back to staff to then also have a workshop, potentially bring in other interested parties for that workshop, and maybe nailing down some more of this verbiage, and then the actual minimums, maximums, and process. Is that what I?
That's my motion.
Okay. Okay, so, all right, so that was the motion, and, Tim seconded. Okay, do we need a roll call vote for that one? Okay.
Commissioner Howard,
I know,
Okay, I didn't know if you heard.
I'm struggling, guys, because I'm a water purveyor, and as long as we don't have the minimum of 20 feet in there, I'm okay with it, but 20 feet is not adequate as far as I'm concerned.
Today is just going back to, we're gonna go back to the
All
workshop.
right,
and the
if that's
workshop.
the case, then I'll go with that.
Okay, he said aye.
Commissioner James,
Aye.
Commissioner Summer,
Aye.
Commissioner Slater,
Aye.
Commissioner Bowles,
Aye.
Commissioner Foster,
Aye.
Chair Bates.
Aye. All right, so we'll schedule then a workshop, presumably sooner rather than later for that, and try to get everybody there to be able to get this nailed down as quickly as possible.
Madam Chair, just
Yes.
for the benefit of everybody here, those are open to the public, so.
Yes, please, and public commenting too, you can submit those online as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, with that, where's the agenda here? This, workshop, I will entertain, or this public hearing, I will entertain a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
and that was,
Second.
okay, thank you. want to do roll call on closing? On the
No, I
adjournment?
can be engaged.
Okay, all those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and by the way, remember, we still have a workshop, so we have to stay. Thank you, everybody, for the public, everybody that came and gave public testimony. It's been very helpful, very enlightening. Really appreciate your feedback and the time that you guys spent there with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, the workshop's open to the public.
Yes, you can stay.
I think the public should all stay and be water.
Now you're back to work.
Are you guys being ready for the workshop to get out?
This other goes.
I know, I don't think it'll last long. Yes, go right I didn't get your first and last name. D-A-H-L, and your position is? That's right. Pardon?
Kevin's my boss.
Oh, how do you do, boss? You do okay? Okay, you get to keep your job.
Came back from the
Wow, exciting. Just for this, right? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I know like word this is like two. I don't know, I wanted to make it clear, like these ordinances, this is all, we were asking recommendation from the Navy before. And so for us, we're like not eliminating progenitors of any, like regs and things like that, just, where the police officers of the regs.
Right.
Right.
Otherwise, it'd be kind of a conflict of interest.
Right,
If
so-
you're, yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, you did,
Right.
yeah, good. And I can make that announcement again, when we come to the workshop, or you come, you can make that too, so maybe that here, but I think that came across.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we do have the MOA, we have an MOA from the county to do all the operation. So it's a little bit,
It's walking that line. No, everything was great. Yeah. Okay, so I am opening our planning and zoning workshop for May 7th, 2026. Calling this workshop to order. It was at 4:43 PM. You guys are left interesting. Okay, so we are gonna cover ORA 26-0003, restricted residential setbacks. And I will again defer over to Manager Tarbutton and Director Gary for their presentation on this.
Okay, so this one I hopefully will be much briefer as far as the conversation goes. I don't think it's as controversial either. However, certainly would love hearing your guys' comments and your thoughts. This is something that we did bring before the planning commission in the form of a workshop previously. We have been batting around some ideas about setbacks. We were initially focused on a couple areas within the county, Hayden Lake, specifically because of some of the slopes issues, and then also Bayview because of, the actual lot sizes within those areas. They're, most of them are created before 1973, which when we had a land use regulation that they created in lot size, that created the setbacks, and so in some sense, they cannot comply with those setback regulations as we currently have adopted. Similarly, along Hayden Lake, because of the slopes, we were getting repeated variance requests because, again, people are not able to comply with the setback regulations from the roads and the sort of property lines specifically because of those steep slopes. So the Board of County Commissioners has come to staff and requested that we look at some kind of alternatives, whether it be in the form of a code amendment, or some kind of overlay district that would apply to these areas. And so after having a chance to look at some of the proposals, vetting around some of the ideas that staff has had in combination with some of the questions and comments from the Planning Commission, we have come back before you with an idea that would apply not just to the restricted residential, not just to the Hayden Lake zone area or the Bayview area, but would apply to restricted residential in its entirety. And just so that you have some kind of visual aspect of that, I'm gonna turn on our zoning map so that you have a sense as to where those zones are. They are, it might be a little bit hard to see on this map here, but I'll do my best. But yeah, you'll see that there's the yellow area that are mostly surrounding our water bodies. And we're continuing further south on Coeur d'Alene. So that is the restricted residential zone. That is where this proposed setback change would apply to. Again, these areas, because they're around the lakes, do have some unique characteristics, slope issues. As I mentioned in Bayview, there are some lot size concerns that just make it complicated, if not just impossible, not possible, for a property owner to comply with the current setback regulations. So, what is before you, just again, this is a workshop, so we just wanted to present the idea to you, is that still recognizing that there are some lots that are going to be created before January 3rd of 1973. Again, that is when our zoning regulations were first adopted. That's what established the setback regulations. So for those that were created before January 3rd of 1973, that are in a restricted residential zone, and are less than 8,250 square feet in size, so that's the current minimum lot size of that zoning district today, then they would be held to the below setbacks. So that would be 10 feet from the front yard setback, 5 feet from the side yard setback. If there were an alleyway on the side, then it would be 5 feet as well. Rear yard setback of 5 feet, and a flanking street means it has frontage on that that street, but it doesn't get its primary access from that street, would be a 5-foot setback as well. Parcels on the other column there, parcels that are greater than 8,250 square feet in size would be held to those standards, which would be 10 feet from the front, 8 feet from the side, 5 feet from the side of an alley, 10 feet from the rear, and 10 feet from a flanking street. So that is primarily the proposal. There was one other suggested change that staff is making, and that is with regards to setback regulations, or essentially exceptions to setback requirements. Not too long ago, you heard a matter for the marine service businesses, and part of that was lumped together a standard in which we eliminated a side yard setback for trams. And we had a discussion about shared property owners that if they agree with one another, then should there actually be a side yard setback requirement? And it was the planning commission's recommendation, the board agreed that that should be approved. And so there is not a side yard setback for trams currently. Now, what staff felt is that, it makes sense that we should apply that same logic to stairways, walkways, and so on. And so that is also being proposed with this amendment. So those are really the two main subjects, and certainly be interested in your guys' thoughts, opinions, questions, and so on.
Are you in favor of it?
Yes, I am.
I just,
Hold on, were you done, Lee?
What's that?
Were you done talking?
Yeah.
Were you done? Okay, go ahead.
the comment I have is it's around, like Fairhaven, it's down along the east shore of Kootenai Lake. And the only thing is here, and it's not our purview or maybe even our responsibility to be concerned about this, but, you got a 2-room cabin on a lot on Kootenai Lake, and somebody comes in and builds a 5-story mansion on the same property. And I don't know how you guys deal with it. There's probably not a single property along Kootenai Lake here that meets any requirements for septic tank and drain fields without collecting the effluent and pumping it across Highway 97 up to a mound process on the hillside up there. You just can't do it. You can't keep, but that's, panhandle health and stuff. It's just, we need to be cognizant of, as long as this doesn't interfere or add a problem to build mansions on cabin lots, that's all I'm concerned about.
It's a good thought. As part of any building permit process, it would go to the appropriate agencies for review. And so, in the scenario that you're talking about, it would be required that they show compliance with however they're mitigating their wastewater. So, Panhandle Health District or the appropriate sewer district, if that's the case, before they get their building permit.
And just as long as we're not messing with their stuff.
Yeah, and adding to that, that wouldn't change the shoreline management area at all either.
Even that's the 25 foot.
Like you get the rear yard setback, but they still have to have that 25 feet.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. That's a good point. Dave and I worked on that years ago.
So the purpose of setbacks are,
The purpose of setbacks are kind of a safety measure and a uniformity measure. So they give some kind of uniformity to the character of a neighborhood, as well as provide some kind of level of safety, whether it be for construction, activity that are going on adjacent properties. I don't know, maybe there's another.
Fire is a big one.
Fire.
That was
Yeah.
the original reason for setbacks was to keep
That's what-
fires from spreading to one structure.
Right, that's
from
what
one
I-
structure to another.
I figured, and so would the fire department be unhappy with this 5 feet? Even though the lot is small, is that still okay?
Most of those are gonna fight for the vote anyhow.
Or gonna what?
They're gonna fight the fire for the vote anyhow, most of these.
A boat?
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about these lots in this area where they were created before, 73, so they're smaller, so they can't comply anyway. But if, just, would the fire department be unhappy? Because it's essentially 10 feet, right? Because 5 for one, 5 for the other, right? So total of 10. 10 is these two tables?
This table's 8 foot, no, these are 6 foot.
6. So would the fire department, if they see this, would they go, okay, we're okay with it, or?
Well, they would be given an opportunity to comment, as part of the building permit review. Furthermore, building division would have an opportunity to review the structure, and the type of construction would need to be rated appropriately, depending on surrounding uses. I think, and, you know, Pat, I don't know if you know the answer to this question or not, and our building official is not here at the moment, but I think that there may be, I don't know if there's a prescriptive setback within the building ordinance.
There is not.
There's not, okay. And so they would just base it upon how close the structure is, and then whatever the building code requires. So they would handle that in the type of construction.
The materials especially.
Materials essentially, yeah, right.
As far as fire is concerned.
As far as the fire rating.
Yeah.
So there's other hurdles that would prevent any potential fire hazard?
Yeah, so they would look at the proposed structure and say, you're so close to another structure, you're using that structure for this purpose, whatever, maybe a garage or something, or a house. The building code requires a certain rating for fire construction, depending on how close they are to that adjacent
Or
structure.
even within the building itself. Two layers of 5/8 sheet rock on the roof of the garage, if you have welding above it, things like that,
Yeah.
or on the ceiling, I mean, things like that, yeah.
Ben, on this, like on the trims and stuff, you said where two properties are using, you said this is similar to that. Would both parties have to sign a thing to, so that they could use it?
Yeah, there should be some mutual agreement before the county, issues or approves some kind of land use permit to allow for some of that.
With the variances that the Board of County Commissioners was having to deal with, would these, pretty much take care of those problems? So these would not, they wouldn't be getting as much of the variance request?
That's
Or take care of all of them, or just a majority, or?
It is gonna take care of a majority of them. It's probably, it's not gonna take care of all of them. One of the standards that we get routinely from the highway district, Lakes Highway District specifically, is that for, and this was on Hayden Lake Road, is that they would like to see a minimum of a 10-foot setback, so that there's enough room for essentially the car to get off of the public right of way. So that was kind of how that 10-foot number came about. But if I just zoom in for a moment, kind of in the Bayview area, I think I probably have.
There ain't 10 feet on that road, is there?
What's that?
There's not 10 feet on that road.
Not on a lot of portions of that.
Yeah, so there are some lots within Bayview that are extremely small. This one, for instance, just to give you a sense, is about 60 by 60. And so it may, I mean, if you put in, and these ones were created before 73, so they would be held to, they would be held to that standard. You know, when you take 10 feet from the front and 5 feet from the rear, you're left with 45 feet there. And then 5 feet on the sides. I'm not sure whether or not they could truly get a dwelling within that area, but it's certainly gonna provide relief. And they have the ability to, I guess, try and work with the prescribed setbacks. And if they feel like they can't meet them for whatever reason, then they still would have the opportunity for variance.
Okay, perfect. asking if we're okay with these, and then if we are, what would be the next step? Go to a public hearing for
Yep,
this as well?
that's, what we would like to know is if you have any questions, comments, concerns, direction for staff. If you don't have any major concerns and you're supportive of staff moving forward, then yes, scheduling a public hearing would be the next step. And we could coordinate with everybody here in the office, or the room, to see what maybe a next opportunity may be for that.
You need 30 days? What's
At a
the,
minimum, I think we need 28 days, but yeah.
You know, if we could, I don't think this is gonna be a big controversy, so we might be able to have a hearing, a shorter hearing. And if there's some other workshop things that we might have to do, if you guys could combine the hearing for this fairly innocuous thing and have someone,
We'll go back
maybe
to
the
our
workshop on this thing we went through today.
Right.
Yeah.
would that work?
Are there any other alternative proposals to this?
I don't, I mean, we did kick around an idea of, having an overlay district that applied just geographically to those areas that I mentioned before. So that was an alternative that staff had considered. I think just with further analysis, this seemed to be a better option moving forward.
Well, I know those properties down along Coeur d'Alene Lake down around Highway 97, and I think you got there's same kind of a problem, extension down there too, as we continue to grow and people knock down their tar paper shack and build a 5-story mansion on a little narrow slot, you know, so easier to go to the
Guess I gotta keep more money in the brains.
So, questions, concerns for this, for Ben? We okay moving forward then, using this, for a public hearing? All right, there you go.
Okay. Is there a date that you have in mind that, we could shoot for?
Well, our next workshop is the end of this month, right?
28 or something like that.
We have something else scheduled this month, and then we have, or is it June?
I think this
Seven?
was what we had for the 28th, wasn't it, Ben?
We need to mention that it's in our minutes.
What are we doing?
20, we have something on the 28th, because that went out, did that get firmly scheduled for the 28th?
Something.
I believe that, wasn't it this that we were gonna talk about on the
That's
28th,
right.
and you got it done ahead of time, Ben? I think,
I am not recalling off the top of my head right now.
It was, yeah,
Well, I think it's just, it's probably IMS, right? But that's,
because it was either the 21st or the 28th,
right.
and then it ended up being put down on
Let
the
me see if I can
28th.
pull up my Outlook and see what I sent you.
I don't remember what was allowed.
And I don't have that email on this phone. And then June 11th, I have as, also scheduled.
let's see.
I have a note that June 11th was SDJ Alliance.
Let's see, yeah.
Oh, that's the other.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But we got the 28th.
I don't have anything around.
That was for the 28th, you know.
It's on the comprehensive plan.
Oh, that's, yeah. On it.
I'm waiting for my email to come up and I'll be able to see what I sent you, but I think it was to discuss this. It wasn't data centers, was it? We'd already done that, one,
So,
Did we? Or does that get moved back to us again? Oh.
Eventually it will, just because I think the commissioners want to scale back the size of data centers they want to allow.
Okay,
So, but we're gonna get more guidance from them.
Pretty zero.
okay.
What's the status of the one about the AI thing? Where are we?
The AOI,
The,
area of impact?
no, it's the computer thing, center thing.
State
Sandy
centers,
Center.
that's what he was
Yeah,
just
it's-
talking about, that's what Pat was just talking about.
Yeah, we need more guidance from the county commissioners as to what they want to see, and then we'll draft.
Because I knew they got fuzzy with it after.
That's right.
We got to thinking about going to court over that one.
All right, well, we can touch base with everybody later and see, what schedules are. If we're 28 days out, I don't, well, we can ask, do you think we could handle a public hearing and a comp plan update and, I don't think we can do all of that on Monday.
Comp plan.
We've got,
Should be quite-
got some good time in that.
We do, so
Let's
that
just do the
means,
next meeting after.
okay, so
Yeah.
that would be, June 25th. How does that work for everybody? Thursday, June 25th?
I don't have all this calendar.
Okay, so let's just throw that out there.
Just have them send it.
I gotta check with Paul's calendar.
Is
Can't
this
do nothing without
June
that.
25th? June 25th?
Yeah, I'll check the calendar.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'll follow up with everybody. I'll put it out there and you guys can, let us know if that works. So,
Probably.
okay, with that.
So moved.
Not yet.
Hang on.
Not yet. Do we have any other announcements? No? Okay, now I will entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
All right.
Gone.
And everyone? Aye. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for sticking this out today. That was a long one. Really appreciate everyone, staff, Jocelyn,